Yeah, thank you. Good point. I mean, we'd have the live recording, but
Jason, can I tell people what's going on?
hold on one second. I want to make sure we're live. Okay, we are live. Hello, everyone. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us for another fun-filled episode of Holy Shit, We're in Trouble. So yeah, thanks everyone. Give us just 1 minute. I'm gonna actually just share the new link because we have a new link. No one's actually watching right now because nobody has the link. So let me share this link to my Facebook. And I'll just clean this up for when we actually.
Is it up yet?
It's up, but no one's watching because no one has.
No, I just didn't see the link on your Facebook page.
Hold on 1 second. Okay, I just shared it. You should see it now. I'll probably do another introduction because right when I went live, no one actually would have been watching. I mean, there's no way that anyone would have happened to have caught that. So
it's up.
There we go.
Just take
all right, yeah. Do you have it shared? Let me grab, and then let me just share it on the original. Sharing it to one more place. Okay, I think we're good. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're back with Allison. And once again, we had to create a new link. So if you could help us out, if you're watching, share this on your social media. And yeah, I'm just going to let Allison take it from here. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Well, hello, everybody. This is part 2 of our gathering. I don't know, Jason, I'm thinking actually it may end up extending beyond another session because I'm not sure that we're going to be able to get through everything today. We went about 3 hours yesterday and it's up on Jason's, the first part is on Jason's page. So I'm just going to share my screen here and get started. Oh, Jason, I need permission to share my screen.
One second.
Okay. Let me see. All right, present. And options, just a second. Okay, here's the present version. Okay, so this is the second part of a presentation that I gave last Saturday in Utica, New York. It was in collaboration with Tom Cowan and Andrew Kaufman, and I gave a presentation that morning, and the focus was on essentially virology as a tool of global systems change. And then increasingly, as I developed my talk, the focus was significantly around recent developments in graphene and nanoelectronics and nanotech biosensors in the health space and how that has implications for the larger biosecurity, surveillance apparatus and impact investing and digital twinning and all of these things. So if you're joining us for the second half, great. I just thought to start off for context, I would take a moment and go over essentially an infographic I created for this talk that I think touches on the main issues that I want people to keep in mind. And it's a lot. I'm always sort of long form and wordy, and I apologize for that. But if you want sort of a handy dandy reference guide for how Allison is currently thinking about these issues, this would be it. And so what we're going to try to do today is I will sort of cover a chunk of material, and then we will pause and do some Q&A. And actually, I think we got some nice clarification and some good material out yesterday with the questions and answers. So I believe Jason is going to be monitoring the YouTube chat. And I don't think that in this platform we're able to mirror this to Facebook per se, but if it's preferable to leave comments in the YouTube as opposed to the Facebook. Either way, we'll try to sort of pause and cover that. And Jason, if you don't mind, I think what I'm going to do is after this initial walkthrough of the main topics is just take a quick pause at the beginning to see if people may have had remaining questions from yesterday or questions about this infographic before we get started. Okay.
No problem.
And this is my just to sort of clarify in just some of the responses to some material that we had posted from yesterday. I think there are some people who are looking at the information that I'm surfacing, and again, and this is a collaboration with quite a lot of other people on the internet, but I'm one of the people who's trying to synthesize it and put it out, be the public face of this, is that that people find it frightening and counterproductive, and some people. And I would say I'm here as a public service, and if it feels like that to you, like by all means, they would like for us to be in fear that advantages them. So if by listening to this or engaging this material, this puts you in a bad place, feel free to disconnect on that. Like, I understand, and this is not for everyone. For me, I feel more in control when I am understanding the information. And I feel that very much as I continue to evolve in my analysis of what's actually happening, those nuances and changes in our understanding really influence what I feel would be successful strategies. And so the strategies of dealing with something that is a Defense Department engineered bioweapon based in virology is a very different strategy than trying to deal with potentially weaponized environmental level electromagnetic frequencies and nanotechnology. And so I have sort of shifted in my understanding of this past year to really having a much clearer focus in recent months on the latter, on the issue of electronics and signals intelligence and how that works within our body as a water-based being. So that's where I'm at. And feel free to take it or leave it. I'm not here selling anybody anything or trying to sort of enforce certain ways of knowing. I can't say that I'm right on all of these things, but we're moving forward. So to that end, with that in mind, and again, I'm not saying that there are many plans afoot involving the takeover of the universe, which I do not think will actually transpire. But part of the test perhaps may be, will we stand up and do the right thing as relatives of all living beings on the planet, right? So, and if we do nothing, then perhaps worse things will happen than if we actually stand up. So my understanding of what is going on, the end goal, it's not really about money, because the people who are running this game have more money than they could ever spend. And increasingly, I think it's not so much even about controlling all beings on the world just for the sake of control. That these folks are looking at a program of whole spectrum dominance. So everything from the tiniest microbe all the way up to, cosmic energy waves and outer space. They want the whole continuum. That as part of that program, they see advancing something called the Internet of Bio-Nanothings, which is where essentially natural energetic life becomes integrated with an engineered, largely militarized system of digital control. So it's this biodigital convergence, and that's the Internet of Bodies, the Internet of Everything, this Internet of Bio-Nanothings. It's very important in my analysis to situate this within militarism, because I think there are those who would advance AI as just a logical aspect of evolution. But I would say if you discount that most of the cloud-based computing systems and the internet itself and everything that comes after that was born largely through military research and development. So it is in my opinion, a militarized, colonialized project. And it is based in the idea that humans are above nature. It's a Western scientism view, and that humans would know best as far as what a quality of life would be. And that is very much grounded in eugenics, which manifested, largely within, like, we traditionally think of it like as the realm of the Nazis, but realistically, much of that was birthed here in the United States, in indigenous erasure, and then later at Cold Springs Harbor Lab on Long Island and the Rockefeller Medicine Protocol. So eugenics is central. Also in the UK, the Fabians were very much about, that was a big piece of it. That we are moving towards a mechanical consciousness, so away from a natural energetic system to a mechanical engineered system. And that really what is happening is something that's almost vampiric or parasitic, in which this predator energy seeks to harvest our life force to power its own, a computer of its own design. So it's in my opinion, looking at this as a parasite on life itself on the planet. And that ultimately their ideal would be to create consciousness and recreate it in a mechanical form that is portable and suitable for interplanetary mobility. And whatever that looks like, that they would compact what it is to be human, and for and use our humanity, use our life force in ways of superseding our current laws of physics and time and space. So that's sort of the bigger goal, and what they will do, what they have been setting up for decades actually to get there. At the top is cybernetics. So this is the idea of understanding the human mind, of cognition and engineering behavior. And I would encourage, I've actually uploaded recently to my YouTube channel a little teach-in that I did at the childhood neighborhood of B.F. Skinner, who was a proponent, a Harvard professor of operant conditioning, of engineering life from pigeons to people through reward and behavior systems, and that is tied to systems management and AI. Now, the engineered behavior will increasingly be linked in the context of the climate crisis to both pandemic and climate catastrophe. And so we will be put on pathways of certain behavioral expectations within the justifications that we have to preserve our health from a pandemic, and that we have to preserve the planet. Both of which are laudable goals, but not within the construct that they are building. The construct they were building will further degrade quality of life for the masses of humanity on the planet, and further degrade the planet by enforcing sensor technologies and new electrical systems all over the planet. But it is a parody, really, of both social justice and environmental justice that they are rolling out, but they have the propaganda narrative on their side. The narrative is very important. We are in an information war. This is coming, and the idea of psychological operations is wedded into the defense contrasting system. I think many people would want to believe that is not being used against, governments would not use those against their own populations, but I very much believe that is not the case, that we are immersed in narrative control, increasingly sophisticated through the use of predictive profiling, data analytics, and social media. So custom delivery of messaging to engineer people's mindsets into a certain direction. And really over the past 16 months, it's been about fomenting people to have a fear of death, to be uncertain and constantly confused and questioning, and then to increasingly be socially isolated, to fragment all of the cultural bonds that we have. The means of control within the cybernetic system, those are the sensor networks, those are the telecommunications, the small cell installations that are moving to 5 and later 6G and other Gs, that will remake the world as a ubiquitous computing environment. And within our navigating that environment, we are tracked as one item, a virtual item in the environment, through our biometric identity. That will be the digital identity likely tied to health passports. And that we will be managed through our biological processes through this software system. So I'm going to go up to the green and just talk about the importance of virology as a field of study, that we need to be very clear moving forward if what we imagine we're dealing with is a virus, a deadly virus-based military weapon, or if what we're dealing with is a mass level environmental poisoning through electromagnetic systems. And I will advance the information that I currently have, as I believe that is the latter. But if you can frame what is happening as almost an invisible assailant that cannot be discerned with our current means of our current sensory experiences, that really the only means of discerning is if you have access to very advanced technologies, and those technologies are in the hands of people who have been credentialed by the system of domination, then virology and the electron microscope become tools of that domination, because unless you can pull in the tools and use them to actually provide a wide-ranging conversation around the findings, then you're not going to get the right information. And increasingly, what I talked about yesterday was La Quinta Columna in Spain, that they had actually gotten the electron microscopy done in terms of various medical materials relating to what's happening, and had discovered significant amounts of graphene oxide across many different delivery systems, medical delivery systems. So as long as we're talking about bioweapons, we're not really talking about nanotechnology and neurotechnology, which is, I think, where the focus should currently be. All of the sensor networks are working to digitally twin us. And in that, this relates to full spectrum dominance. Is sort of a new wrinkle, is that even beyond after I made this infographic, the idea is not simply dominance or not simply compressing our identity into a substrate independent material medium, but is actually to harvest all of our life force to crack the code of life and usurp God in the universe, to have universal domination. And so the digital twin program of using the sensor networks to mirror us in the metaverse is about those systems cracking the code of life by saying they're going to keep us safe and healthy, but by learning us from the inside out and the outside in. And a lot of the technologies that are tied to digital twinning in the health space, tied to electronic health records, atlases about cell function, about bioinformatics and genomics, are going to be linked to the social impact investing space, which is the space where I entered all of this through the educational technology. But in making people dependent and needing support, whether that's support in their health or support in their training or support in their housing, that they will be engaging with sensor networks and behavioral compliance expectations that will feed the AI to eventually, they imagine, and I don't think this will actually happen, but the campaign is to get all of that data to sort of break the code of life, to use the singularity not as an in and of itself, but then to unlock the coding of life as an intelligent design system, and then knock off the top coder, which is God. And that critical to the digital twinning and critical to the data aggregation and the singularity element feeding into the AI is the blockchain ledger and your digital identity system of how you interface with the metaverse. So that's sort of a big mouthful. I will say in this moment, what they are trying to do is frame our disconnect from physical bodies and minds and time and space as liberation. And what I would say is it's actually a system of domination, of militarized domination that is masquerading as care for the environment, care for health, care for disadvantaged populations. So I know that was quite a lot to start with, but before we get into the sort of the meat of the matter, Jason, I don't know what kind of audience we have now, or if anybody had any questions at this point.
Yeah, so we have a few people here. Well, 44 supposedly. I also got it on Facebook as well. I figured out a way to do it. Facebook one's a little bit funkier. It shows the anyway, whatever. So yeah, I do have two questions. How would you explain all of this to a 13 to 17-year-old or to teens? How do you summarize this for that age group?
Well, I think, I mean, I would assume, I'm not a gamer, but I would assume a lot of 13-year-olds understand video game life, right? And so I think if what you told them was the plan was to increasingly disconnect people from their access to the real world and to have them live in a video game world. And as fun as the video game world might seem on the surface, it is actually under control of, military and CIA interests, right? It's under the control. And while you may feel that you have some agency in that space, that you can make your own decisions for yourself, the kind of life that you're allowed to live is very limited. And your right to be able to make decisions for yourself and to live outside of a panopticon, to live outside of this all-seeing eye who's watching your behavior all the time and keeping track and keeping score, and maybe not even knowing all the time what the rules of the game are, and being expected to play anyway, that there's a lot of, that would be psychologically really hard to do for any period of time. And I believe that is what is happening, is that the goal is to make us hate our physical bodies and to seek refuge in a space that was not built for us.
Okay.
I don't know if that's simple enough.
The other question is, do you think one object of C polygon will be to put a kill switch on the evidence being collated or quash uprisings? And how might it affect the people's ability to access this research digital ID? Did that make sense?
Oh, in terms of just like the memory hole idea that they, well, I think to a certain extent, losing information is a concern, losing access to information. I think to a certain extent, it's also how do you plan to use the information? And I think that's what people come at me and they somewhat have a frustration of like, what's the answer or what's the solution? And I don't have the answer or the solution. I have ways that I'm trying to deal with all of this myself, but I can't presume that the approach that I'm taking is the approach that is suitable for everyone. If the idea is that you're aggregating information because you think you're going to hold somebody accountable in a court of law, I have extreme reservations that there's any court system that's actually going to do the right thing. So I think in some respects, being able to internalize, get as much information as solid of understanding and as much clarity around it as possible. And then we all just have to use our voices. I continue to think, as much as I do this work and this research, I'm not saying it's the be all end all. It's only one point in the journey. And I would love to see artists, musicians, poets, people reinterpret this material in ways that are more accessible. Can we cook this? Can we turn it into a meal? Can we turn it into a production? Like, what are some of these other ways of sharing knowledges? Because I think increasingly we'll have to be covert in how we communicate with each other. And part of some of the information that I had shared early on had to do with getting a handle on information theory and communications theory. And Joseph had helped me a lot think about that. And he said that anything can be coded as long as both the transmitter and the receiver share the common language. They know what the symbols are. And I think a lot of these things, people who deal with esoterica understand about looking at coded language through images and words and reading layers. And in fact, I think that's one reason why I'm particularly suited to do this kind of work in this moment, is because my background was in art history and looking at actually medieval paintings and sort of, trying to remember, which saint was broken on the wheel, these visuals. So I guess that's sort of my answer. I think we can't live in a, they're going to make information more difficult to get, and then they're going to make it more crucial of tracking who's accessing what information. And I actually have had a couple of comments on my post where I was talking about blockchain yesterday, and people are like, well, if you're against blockchain, you should just be off the internet entirely. And I, in some ways, am I saying that I'm doing the right thing? I don't know. I may not be. Like, maybe the best thing for me is just to go sit in the woods and think about this myself. I don't know. Right now, I feel like I am contributing information that people are still finding useful. But I will say, once you have to have a universal ID to access the internet, then the internet really will be like blockchain. Then when you're hearing about the IMF wanting to track people's search histories, that is a key part. So how we share information and how we access information is vital. Cyber Polygon is just one part of that. I think it's clearly been a much larger campaign to control who has access and how the narrative is shaped and how information is used as a weapon, both through how it is asserted and how it is withheld. So we just gotta use our gut, use our gut and use our other intelligences and try to hone some of the alternatives, I think. Is that it for now, Jason?
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, okay, cool. All right, well, I'll keep going then. All right, so again, this is just an image that I used earlier yesterday, but this is from the Moonshot Project talking about diversity in the future in 2050, living outside the confines of a mind and body in time and space. And they would like for this to look, it's actually not a very compelling image to me personally, but they would like to show that as something that is giving us lots of other options, as opposed to that by living in an exoskeleton or projecting our consciousness into a robot, that it's actually imprisoning us in ways that we can't even hardly imagine at this stage. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time now talking about cybernetics. I woke up a couple weeks ago at like 4:30 in the morning saying, like, Allison, you have to go back and look at the Macy conferences again. And it's something I looked at a while ago and then I had stopped. But the early era of computing and artificial intelligence and the work of Norbert Wiener in all of this is really central. And I first found out about it through Yasha Levine's book, Surveillance Valley, which I would highly recommend for context about the military history of the internet. She had a whole section about Norbert Wiener and cybernetics and essentially engineering of animals, including people. But he started off, his focus was, he helped design ENIAC, which was the first general purpose computing system. It was engineered at Penn, and then they took it to the Aberdeen Proving Grounds, and we did a small ceremony in the vicinity of Aberdeen on the solstice this year to sort of acknowledge that history and try to sort of mend some of that harm. But is the idea of engineering life. And I think in many respects, we need to look at what has been happening in lab trials with rats and mice with different biosensor technology and nanotechnology. And I will say, I have been in touch with a number of people who have been targeted by nanotechnology systems. So it seems pretty clear that the trials for these technologies are happening beyond simply mice and rats at this point, but that are extending out to non-consensual human experimentation. And that's something that has actually been looked into by the United Nations. So not that I think that there's a lot of remedy there, but at least they have to at least put on a show of caring about this. And so increasingly they're blending in this internet of bio-nano things, they are engineering life even at cross purposes. So they've developed humanized mice, which are mice that have genetic material and human characteristics to use for testing medical protocols, right? And someone shared with me on the Senate floor in May that they rejected an amendment to prohibit the creation of chimeras, which are these blended beings, right? And we even know that the genetic modification has been already happening, cross species, tomatoes and fish, and vice versa. That they have already been really doing a lot of the biotech industry has been going down this road of genetic engineering in ways that are incredibly problematic. And the fact that the GMO, that the activists in the GMO space who are looking so closely at the food we consume do not have this broader understanding of GMOs apply to much more than plant life, but literally all beings, including up to human life at this point. So that's something to be concerned about. And that we have to look and see what's happening to the mice, because the mice, again, as I said, are the plans for the mice are the plans for all of the beings, including the people. And so as a child, I feel like I want to go back and read this book, Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of NIMH, but they were talking about these super intelligent rats that escaped from the lab and sort of how they plotted their civilization away from people. And it brought to mind, I mean, this book was from the early 1970s. But they're doing work. This, and a lot of times, it's word spells. This is a system where they developed a way to use light stimulation of neurons to get mice to crave certain objects. So that this experiment, it says, reduce the object craving behavior using optogenetics technology. And if you understand that most of the devices that we're using, the camera that I'm in front of now with this recording, has an optic element to it. There are lights, and that they can blink lights without you even knowing it. The same with smart televisions, the same with other types of optics that are in our built environment, increasingly smart environments. And unless you understand that there can be cellular engineering happening that change your how your neurons function and how your behaviors are linked to light, use of light and use of LED light and photostimulation, it's pretty scary, because what they're talking about is object craving behavior. And we know that in the space of advertising, they have been working very closely in neuromarketing, actually, beyond just simply doing A/B testing and trying to figure out what products certain subcategories of people will like, that they're actually getting the advertising down to a neural directed level, which is pretty incredible. So I would just assert that the billionaires see us no different from the mice. We are just livestock to be managed. I've spoken a lot in the past about the Internet of Bodies. So I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about this now. I have a long talk with Sergi about the weaponization of health systems and wellness systems in this space. But if you look at the future of health, how they depict actually a collection of human beings, I guess it's not clear if this is a collection of individuated human beings or perhaps these are twinned beings of the person standing in front. But that is very much signals intelligence. So managing human life processes as dots and dashes, sort of Morse code, electrical signaling. And embedded within that, very much, it starts off as a rainbow and then it sort of grays out. And so if we imagine sort of all of the graphing conversation that we're having, it adds an interesting symbolic layer. And this is from Macro Eyes, which is a satellite surveillance system that was tracking uptake of injection protocols in Africa. This was referenced in a Harvard Business Review article last spring, Macro Eyes. So how you read the terms, again, the Internet of Bodies, risks and opportunities. So this document was done by RAND, but it was funded by Swiss Reinsurance. And so once we understand, and this was my space earlier, that all of this is being driven by risk analysis and predictive profiling for human capital markets, but then also the signals intelligence runs not just to the financial markets, but to the military as well. And then once you start to put the lens on that life can simply be viewed as an electrical engineering equation, I think we lose all of the sacredness of what life on this planet actually is about. In part of the knowingness, and I talked yesterday about the planetary computer that Microsoft was working on and the barcode of life, that Chan Zuckerberg is central in this, in working in the brain space. They have a biohub that's at the in the Bay Area at the University of California, San Francisco. They are working on a lot of digital therapeutic technologies. And in that space, they are awarding millions upon millions of dollars to map cells and to actually understand life as a machine. And this is important. I will say I came into the space from the education space. So the two sides of things were healthcare and education. And so when you understand the cybernetics of engineering life, it is engineering the biological processes of life, and then it is also engineering mindset and learning. So they're coming at it from both sides, both the body and the educational system. A lot of the research that is happening in the biosensor space is framed as longevity research. And that is sort of central to the transhumanist game. If you understand that the end goal is a substrate independent mind, so that you will exist with your consciousness is captured in a matrix that's outside of your actual physical body. I think we need to increasingly understand that human enhancement or longevity is longevity not as we understand it in our current body, but in a digitized format. And so these are just some of the images that are connected with DARPA and human performance optimization. Is what are they? They are almost optimizing our bodies to a post-human future, and that is happening again through military technology. But it's embedded within cancer research, within Alzheimer's research, within research around neurodegenerative diseases, and so it's all dual use technology. So they will advance the research under the framing that we're helping people to live longer or better lives, or to remedy these chronic illnesses. But at the end of the day, it really is advancing a post-human future. So this is what the Internet of Bodies and Minds looks like. This is from the RAND report, and I've shared this image before online, but I will just read out a few of these things because these are clearly all technologies that are being developed. There's a baby here at the bottom, and I've spoken before about Lena, L-E-N-A, which was developed to track the speech of parents to their children, specifically targeted towards low-income families that are being told that they don't speak to their children in the proper way, and that they actually have this little device that's like the size of a not a small index card, a pretty big index card that would slide in a child's onesie and wirelessly record family conversations under the purview that this is somehow like an equity with social justice, that they care about these families to make them better so that they'll speak to their children better by recording all of the conversations. But the baby here, it has a baby diaper monitor, the temperature sensing pacifier. Of course, we know all of the things that are happening now around this idea that you're using temperature as somehow an indication of contagion. The woman here actually has a fertility measurement device, and that goes along with eugenics and the reproductive control systems, is having artificial organs. This is an artificial pancreas, the idea that they intend, and whether or not this is and they can accomplish this, but they speak of printing 3D organs, and who knows like what the material is that they're actually printing on those organs, but they're talking about artificial organs. The fitness trackers, and those fitness trackers have been normalized over the past decade of wearing the fitness trackers, but once we understand the goal is piezoelectric energy harvest, human energy harvest, not only to, I believe, power the wearable technologies, but to actually harvest excess energy to power the metaverse. That is all part of the step count. And I've spoken before about how in West Virginia, a number of years ago, the statewide teacher strike was essentially hinged on the fact that their wages were being garnished for their insurance payments if the teachers refused to wear a Fitbit tracker. And that was sort of one of the straws that broke the camel's back in that West Virginia teacher strike. So the fitness and the step counts are really important in all of this. Meditation headsets, they want to know your brain waves, they want to know your mental state. The intraocular lens with a camera, again, that is linked to augmented reality, and we know that is running through Niantic and the CIA. Tooth-mounted sensors. So, you hear about voice-to-skull technology and being weaponized against targeted individuals. Here they're laying it right out here. The microchip implant, again, we know very clearly about the digital payment systems that the plans are eventually to move from digital devices to implantable technologies. And there's an electronic tattoo, and I actually have an image about that later. Cochlear implant. And I've mentioned before, I'm in Philadelphia, and the University of Pennsylvania, and the University of Pennsylvania Health System is central to much of the impact investing and the technology and the biotech development space. And actually, CHOP, Children's Hospital of University of Pennsylvania, has been a leader in cochlear implants. So it's very interesting when you understand the goal of being other uses of acoustics and frequencies beyond simply having them applied to people who have issues with their hearing. Also a depression headset, because we know depression is a central social impact market area for social impact. And then of course, you've got it connected into your environment through your electronic health records, which I've spoken about previously. That was a key element of Zeke Emanuel. Again, Zeke Emanuel is one of three brothers, Ari Emanuel, who does the entertainment business with Rain Group, which is Joe Ravitch, which is Diane Ravitch's one of her sons, who is working the other part of that group is Jeff Sine, who is one of the main investment advisors to SoftBank, which is running one of the world's largest innovation AI groups, and they're doing blockchain education credentials. But so Zeke Emanuel, that brother, is the bioethicist at Penn, and he was an architect of the Affordable Care Act, and a key element of that was the electronic health record. So of course that was going to be keeping track of all of your health behaviors and working on the digital twinning. And then smart environments, including internet connected toilets and sleep sensing mattresses. And I will say sleep, I think, is very important, and I'll talk about this a bit later, but in gathering all of the data to crack the code of life, the understanding that in sleep our sort of etheric body accesses other dimensions of frequency and processing, I think that is one frontier that there is great interest in, because they probably have like about as much step count data as they really need, but they really are interested in other kinds of data. And I think being able to capture the electrical conditions of our mind and our body in REM sleep is something that is of significant interest to them. So having the sleep tracking onesies on the baby and the sleep tracking sensing mattresses is a part of this. Okay, so my space has been around impact investing and social impact finance, and that's what I've been working really hard on the past over the pandemic. And now I've stretched myself, because I think this health stuff is really important, and the nanotechnology and the electrical engineering side of things. And I will just reinforce. Yesterday, I acknowledged a number of people who had helped inform my work, and I will say, if you want to do a deeper dive into the nanotech and graphene, that someone that I have been collaborating with, who blogs at the blog A Piece of Mindful, piece like a puzzle piece, a piece of mindful. It's a collaborative blog, but this person blogs under Steffers, like Stephanie, but just Steffers. There's very detailed information, and this person is doing a very deep dive into graphene that's coming along. But once you understand how pervasive graphene is, you realize it's like a bottomless pit that's really hard to navigate your way back out of. So I expect them to be having more comprehensive posts on graphene coming up, but I would definitely recommend to give them a follow. So yesterday I talked again about the virology versus terrain theory, germ theory versus terrain theory. I am in this place now as I better understand the role of chemical companies in underwriting cancer research and bioinformatics and genomics, that a lot of this game that we are in is intentional poisoning of the environment. And I would encourage people to watch the movie Dark Waters if you haven't. Mark Ruffalo's book, it talks about DuPont and the intentional poisoning of Parkersburg, West Virginia, but much more than Parkersburg, like the whole world, essentially through Teflon, that these corporate interests are poisoning our environment through various kinds of toxins. And increasingly, we need to understand nanoelectronics and electromagnetic frequency as one of these toxins. And I believe that there is going to be an impact of these toxins on chronic illness, including diabetes and prediabetes. And so it's interesting to know that the first social impact bond for health is actually originating in Sweden, I believe, but it is in collaboration with Social Finance Israel. Now, I've done a whole like a 4-hour webinar on social impact investing in Israel and the role of social finance, and Sir Ronald Cohen, who's based out of London but has close ties. His wife is from her family is from Israel, and they have a significant presence in Israel. So they are partnering on the social impact bond around diabetes. And a lot of that will include various kinds of wearable technology, biosensors. And then I would not be surprised if at some point there's also an internal biosensor. So I want to talk about a little bit about the energy harvest and the step counts and, walking for good health, and how this interfaces both with graphene and with the impact markets and with hedge funds. So you can see here, this is from the Jerusalem Post. I'll just read this first paragraph. Israel can bring this innovation to the world. The social bond for preventing diabetes is innovative, also because it is mainstream, he explained. That is, it benefits what can be a very large population at risk, and this is key, at risk, because it's all about predictive profiling, for type 2 diabetes, whose onset is now around ages 40 to 50, when once onset of type 2 was only at ages 50 to 60. So in that paragraph, you can see that they're identifying a large population for these finance markets. And that it's not people who already have diabetes, but simply that they have been profiled by the data as being at risk. Over here on the other side, you can see from Global Impact Investment Network that they are talking about the impact investment market now being $503 billion. And so we have to understand this again, that the biosecurity state and the links to goal 3, which is the UN Sustainable Development Goal of health, that it is about targeting chronic illness that has been manufactured through environmental poisoning, and then tracking people through their digital identity in performing quote unquote good health behaviors that are assigned, that probably also have a piezoelectric energy component to them. And that the tracking of their good behaviors will be linked to biosensors, which I think increasingly will be connected with various forms of nanoelectronics for the Internet of Bodies, that the Internet of Bodies will start to enmesh with the Internet of bio-nano things. So if you understand that chronic illness, there's no incentive to get rid of the chronic illness or to stop the environmental poisoning if you're making money on it. So here we have graphene, which we talked about yesterday about the role of La Quinta columna finding graphene in these various medical protocols. So that was at an electron microscopic level. But these graphene, literally, they're wanting to put it in everything. So here they're talking about, in the context of chronic diabetes and impact investing, that they have a skin patch, or this is that tattoo, when they talk about an electronic tattoo that will measure the blood sugar. So it's important to know that Impact Bond, Social Finance Israel is also working in Sweden, and it is part of this health movement, EIT Health Project. Sweden, again, is Ericsson. It's a lot of the fourth industrial revolution. It's a lot of automation, and it's because they have a pretty robust social safety net, and they have a really high level of adoption of digital technologies and even into the digital payment systems, that this is normalized. And they're looking at accessing, let's see, these economic costs of unhealthy diets. So this is, I've spoken about this with Ice Age Farmer, about controlling food access. So it's about controlling inputs, which is your food, and outputs, which is your exercise, all on blockchain and all tied to these various biosensors. This is the diagram of Social Finance Israel's Diabetes Impact Bond, and you can see the partners at the bottom level. The last one here where I have the arrow pointing is Yad Hanadiv. It's important because Shira Lev Ami is part of the AI electronic health record system in Israel. And she was the former director of Yad Hanadiv, which is Jacob Rothschild's family foundation, right? And so I've had a couple of other podcasts where I go into more detail about the Green Pass in Israel, but once we understand the nexus of the US, the UK, Scandinavia, Israel, defense contracting, hedge fund, bets, and biotechnology and nanotechnology and electronic health record systems, it all starts to blend together, and we can see how these prototypes are happening. So the graphene-based biosensors, whether they're wearables or whether they're internal, are really important to the social impact finance space. And this is just an image that I pulled up from Newsweek just a couple hours ago, and it's from 2016. And literally they're talking about graphene tattoos that not only test your sweat, but that can deliver drugs into your system. And I'm assuming that's probably, either an automated or a remote delivery system. And so, I'm not trying to be too dark, but, all of this is framed as dual use, like we're here to help. But I would say if there are incentives on requiring you to meet certain thresholds to access healthcare, and your biosensor is indicating an improper behavior or that you haven't met expectations, what is there to stop that you're wearing, a device that is a drug delivery system? And what does that mean? Because again, my friend Michael had told me about a book by Ira Levin, The Perfect Day, I think. It's either One Perfect Day or The Perfect Day from 1974. And mandatory medical therapeutics to keep the population in line for a globally managed sort of mechanized society was a key element to that. So they're developing the technologies, and it seems like largely the ethicists are sort of out to lunch. As I mentioned, Penn with Zeke Emanuel, Penn is a center for impact investing and health technologies. Penn has a center for health incentives and behavioral economics. And so forcing people onto pathways, tracking their bodily functions, tracking their behaviors is part of all of the behavioral economic system that will be linked to the impact markets. It's important to know that these centers existed. When I first pulled this slide image, this was about 2 years ago, I wrote a blog post called Minding Our Health, and you can find that on wrenchingthegears.com, Minding Our Health. It was about digital nudges, and I really did not have a full understanding at that point. I was really focused primarily on wearable technologies, and I had not dived at all into nanotechnology or internal biosensor spaces. But it's really pretty intense when you start to put these pieces together. This health incentives and behavioral economics is based out of the business school. This is not about healing people. This is about managing people as machines. And I've touched on this before, but this was an image, was an op-ed in the Sydney Morning Herald last July. So we're going on a year now. The op-ed was saying that in order to qualify for public assistance, that the weight that people may have put on being under lockdown, that people should have to walk and demonstrate their compliance with being physically fit in order to access public assistance. So these things are very real and moving along. Managing people as machines. So as I mentioned before, this image is of Norbert Wiener. His focus was on feedback loops and systems engineering, and that was something I became acquainted with in the education space. Education technology and AI in education through Pearson. And I was thinking, wow, I can't imagine what that's like to have personalized education where you're put in a feedback loop. Like, who gets to decide how they're steering you or to what end, and who is accountable? If for children, you're deciding like different pathways, different caste systems, the alpha, beta, different groupings, we're going to engineer certain minds for certain tasks to suit the metaverse. All of this goes back to cybernetics and Wiener, and his systems analysis was centered on anti-aircraft fire, that you would have the system learn itself and improve its accuracy over time. But again, who is doing the steering? Here is The Perfect Day, IRA 11. So this is the book. The predecessor to that book that is not as well known is We by Yevgeny Zamyatin, which is again a mechanical consciousness where everyone is a compliant citizen of a global mathematical equation. So these books I would highly recommend. And Norbert Wiener was influenced by the Macy conferences. So this is what I woke up thinking. I have to look up the Macy conferences. You can see his book from 1948, Control and Communication in the Animal and the Machine. So at the end of his life, he actually came to a point of understanding that what he had done had terrible implications, and that essentially developing a society built on robots would mean competing with robots for work, which would essentially just become global slavery. And he began to speak out about it, but then he was said that he was a communist and that he was sort of marginalized and pushed off to the side, and no one would listen to him. But really, Norbert Wiener, like his life story and trajectory, is central to understanding information theory and engineering life as a machine. And the fact that all of the engineering that's happening is happening both in a military context and a business context. So the Macy conferences were between 1946 and 1953. Warren McCulloch set them up, and actually one of his proteges, Stafford Beer, who became the spokesperson for management cybernetics and social cybernetics, and was in charge of working on the cybernetic systems for Allende in Chile. He was the one who ran it. And it said that the principal purpose, and I highlighted this in orange, is to set a foundation for a general science of the working of the mind. So if you understand that all of the computing systems, all of the machines, all of the robots are not so much about managing physical labor, which they have, and clearly, like if we look at a car assembly line, a Ford assembly line, having robots that can help people lift and put chassis on cars and put transmissions in, and those kinds of robots are doing physical labor. But what the intellectuals in this were particularly interested in the workings of the human mind. And as I mentioned yesterday, under Licklider's 1963 memo to the scientists working in this space, that he addressed them as scientists interested in the Intergalactic Federation. They want to access the mind because they want to access this universal consciousness to become gods, and that is what the cognitive science space is really about. And I think I'm getting close to stopping, Jason, for questions. But as I mentioned yesterday, World Economic Forum, again, they've laid it out a year ago. I don't know that we need to spend a ton more time interrogating what they're up to. They've made it pretty clear. One of the individuals in this space, she talked about the ethics of understanding people's thoughts, and that is understanding consciousness. Her name is Nita Farhani, and she is at Duke, and she was actually doing collaboration at Wharton Business School on neural engineering. And so the quote from this video says, one of the things I think is so essential to free and open society is freedom of thought. Up until now, the conversation we've been having is around freedom of speech. Okay, so she's weighing thought versus speech. Once we can access people's thoughts, people's emotions, we have to create a space that enables people to think freely, to think divergent thoughts, to think creative thoughts. In a society where people fear having those thoughts, the likelihood of being able to enjoy progress is significantly diminished. And I think in that respect, that's very much the telescreen idea that in 1984 that you come in and then you have to hide out in the cubby from the telescreen to look at a book or have any of your own thoughts because you're in this panopticon. And when someone early on had talked about the how do you explain it to a 13-year-old, always having the eye of your mother on you all the time, like that's what it's like to live in the panopticon. Only your mother with, I guess, potential to administer electronic shocks remotely or medications is part of it. So the fact that Nita Farhani from Duke is collaborating with Wharton is a problem. So again, they're always framing it in good ways, like, here, we just want to help you augment your consciousness. This is a short film, like a foresight film that was done by Alexander Singer of Star Wars, and it was done in the early 2000s for this report, the National Academies of Science. They actually had gathered in 1997 to talk about artificial simulations and merging academics and the military space to work on synthetic people and human machine augmentation. So what they're saying is, like, in the future, there will be so much information as we live in a world that is immersed in technology and data analytics that we're going to need some outside being to help harness all of that information and tell us what we should be paying attention to, because there'll be no way for our own mind, our existing current structure of our brain to process it, because it will be too much. And rather than saying, why do we not just not build that world? Instead, the military and the hedge funds will build that world and then make us fit into it and then hook our brains to things to tell us what to pay attention to. Farhani was working with this guy, Michael Platt. Platt Labs is embedded in Wharton in neuroeconomics. Again, if you understand neural control and the role of biosensors and graphene potentially in managing neural control, managing you as a mouse in a maze, managing your behaviors, managing your desires remotely through how your neurons function, that's pretty crazy, especially when the neuroeconomics melds with behavioral economics. And if you are supposed to perform particular behaviors that serve the sustainable development goals according to what the hedge funds want, that they could actually modulate your neurons to accomplish that behavior. I think all of these intersections are really troublesome, particularly since a lot of his support has come not just through the National Institutes of Health, but through the Defense Department specifically. So he's helped build these neural prosthetics, which at this point, they still look kind of funny. People keep saying, haha, like the Google Glass, that didn't really work out. Well, they're going to continue to monitor it. And then eventually, like, they'll come up with some state of exception to say, like, well, you have to do it anyway. In order to be a good citizen, you have to wear the neural interface, or how will we know what you're thinking? And if we don't know what you're thinking, you'll be a danger to society. So they're in the cybernetic space in understanding how the mind works. I'll just read this text here. This is from the lab at Wharton. We are especially interested in the processes that allow people and other animals, again, they just consider us a talking animal, to make decisions. They want the decision-making control when the environment is ambiguous or complicated by the presence of other individuals. So they want to know about social behavior. We use an array of techniques, including psychophysics, intracranial recordings, brain stimulation, pharmacology, eye tracking, pupillometry, brain imaging, genomics, and epigenomics, and that's the eugenics part, and that is the part that's targeting populations that have been chronically harmed over generations. That I'm adding that bracket to answer these questions. An important goal is to translate some of these techniques into wearable devices that will allow us to take neuroscience into both natural and consumer environments. Okay, and so I will say, Roz Ben, who was a podcaster and someone who does a lot of work around energy work and ley lines in Philadelphia, has long asserted his hypothesis that Ben Franklin, Freemason, had worked with Prometheus to open the gates of hell in Philadelphia. And here we have Ben Franklin eyeing this woman up in her wearable technology that, oftentimes I'll come across these things and think, yeah, Roz Ben, I think you're probably, there's something to that assessment. And I think that this is getting close to my last one, and then I'll take a break. This came actually from my friend who blogs at A Piece of Mindful Steppers. And sometimes I think you walk this path and, some people are afraid to walk the path, and some of us still walk it, and we do it because things unfold and things that are unexpected and sometimes very interesting and helpful. And so something that came across her path in a very serendipitous way was this blog. And this person, Susan Rushton, I think she keeps a blog in gardening in the UK. It's just a personal blog. It's mostly about gardening and photography. And this post happened to be from 2016. And in it, she was talking about analyzing a photograph with a theme of weightlessness. And this photograph was actually of a fairy made out of wire. And we'll talk about like nano wires later, but a fairy made out of wire holding a dandelion, which again is something that I've talked a lot about, the imagery of the dandelion, and it was being blown away, and the idea was weightlessness. So she talked about this statue being put in a meadow in this garden that was actually used during World War II, Trentham Estates, I believe it is. And it was one of those estates that around the early 20th century had fallen into disrepair, but there was a giant ballroom there. And again, we understand music and frequency. And that ballroom was used as the check clearing center for the United Kingdom during World War II. And then later it went back to being a ballroom and a hall for many of the early British bands, the Beatles and Pink Floyd and others. So there's some interesting monetary, financial signals, intelligence stuff going on there, and frequency going on there as well. But it's on this estate. And in her blog post, I will just read this bracketed item. And this is just a brief blog post about this photo. And it says, "I don't mean to imply that her wishes don't matter." I'm assuming that's the fairy. "I'm just pointing out that technically they don't weigh anything, insofar as science has not yet managed to weigh thoughts. I'm sure that will come, exclamation point. Imagine thoughts weighed and wrapped up in graphene." And then later, at the bottom, it says, here's some more information about graphene at the University of Manchester. And this is cited in Staffordshire, which is sort of equidistant between Birmingham and Manchester. And Manchester is the site where graphene, this two-dimensional wonder material, was ostensibly discovered in 2004. So if you understand, as Joseph has taught me, is that the machine learning systems are always about weight. That's how they learn, that you apply different weights to information as it is being processed. And you understand that graphene is being connected to neural function, and that in the quest to decode life, to create a substrate independent mind, that they are looking for a directory, a massive library of neuronal functions. The idea of how they're using graphene in our minds to crack not just the code of biological function, but consciousness in this cybernetic system, in this engineering system, is pretty incredible. And so I don't know how this particular blog post came to be, or how it came to be on our radar, but it does feel rather significant. So let me see. Okay, so that's that was a long one. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for now, Jason. And do people have any questions?
Yeah, I guess I could put my camera back on. Hello. Yeah, I have a couple, well, just a couple
I should have
things
broken
here.
that up into smaller bits. I didn't realize it till I was into it, how long it was.
Oh, it's okay. Can everybody hear me? Oh, looks like my audio is not going through to the Facebook stream. That's all right. I don't think anybody's watching the Facebook stream. Maybe I'll just cancel it. Okay, so I have a couple. The Biden child tax credits might become permanent. Do you have a sense or citations that this will lead to something like state block grants turned over to NPOs as a new source of impact data?
Well, I mean, so I need to probably get more up to speed on the recent developments in the social impact space under Biden. I mean, clearly this administration, it was set up to swing back to the Democrats so that they could sort of weaponize the social care system, both healthcare and through, other credits. There's a lot linked to universal pre-K. Clearly that's the center. The Heckman equation focuses on prenatal care to third grade, which is the reading scores. And so, I'm not sure how it's all going to play out. I'm not sure how the universal basic income, clearly we're seeing more and more and more pilots at a municipal level. And we know that they want the children per se. And I feel strongly that these are all integrated in with the opportunity zones and the promise zones, which are the 20% low income census tracts, because all of the impact investment data was based on 30 years of research done in the Harlem Children's Zone with Jeffrey Canada, who's the director of Harlem Children's Zone, but then with the support of Stanley Druckenmiller, who was one of Soros's open society, hedge fund managers, and with the backing of Paul Tudor Jones of Tudor Investments, of the Robin Hood Foundation. And so the investors are going to invest in engineering through these cybernetic systems, the children on the surveillance play tables and what have you, to usher them into this new world. I mean, that is the plan if we allow it. And I would say my goal is to try to bring people together across disciplines, because at this point, I think if you look at people who follow me on social media, it is pretty much one of every different kind of person, because nobody wants this no one wants this harm to come to the planet, to children, to other beings. So I don't have a specific handle on that child credit, but I would say once we move into a digital programmable currency space, we're going to see both health system vouchers, education vouchers, childcare vouchers, housing vouchers, food vouchers. All of the vouchers are going to be linked to inputs and outputs. And in that way, it's somewhat, that's the technocratic piece. And that's the piece that I've talked about Cardano some, that their framework is this inputs, outputs, Hong Kong, is that they're tracking what is the investment put in, and then what is the economic productivity or the behavioral productivity that is the output. So I don't know if that is specific. I don't have a specific answer on the child credit right now, but that's how I see it being set up. Is there another one, Jason?
Yeah, there's one more. We have, Alice, does Allison have some good books or articles to recommend for learning more about quantum computing? It sounds very different from what we understand it to be, or how we understand it.
I don't actually. I need to know more. I mean, this is a big learning curve for me. All of this particular presentation is on the electronics, and actually I had a conversation with my electronical engineer advisor, Joseph, earlier today, saying, people who have the skill sets in that electronic space, I think that's part of this collective work. If the schema that I'm presenting makes sense to people, if they can see that that's how it might be being structured, then we can dig in different ways. I know that IBM is a central player in the quantum computing space, and then D-Wave. Actually, I'm going to touch on, in I think the next chunk of slides, a woman who's working on soft robotics, and she came out of D-Wave. So I don't have a specific book. I guess the question is, how much do we need to know about it to figure out what to do about it? I mean, are there people who are working in the quantum computing space who, if they knew the larger trajectory, would think that this was a bad plan? Or do they think that the sim model of a substrate independent mind is good? I don't know. Like I would hope that there are some people who are working in these computing spaces that if they understood it as a military dominance empire game of which we're just the mice in the maze, would have second thoughts. But I have to say, based on the clip of the woman that I'm going to feature later, they seem pretty far down that road of not being able to imagine that there's anything they're doing that has a problem with it. So.
Okay, and this is not really a question, but there was some comments on the thread on YouTube regarding technology, and we've heard this argument before that it's all just how you use it. Technology can be good or bad. It's all on how you use it. If it weren't for technology, we'd be still be living in the bushes. Was one of the comments someone said. What would you say to that? It seems like people put this all or nothing sort of,
Well, the bushes are going to be turned into antenna. They're going to be smart bushes and they're going to be watching you. Isn't that a great technological development? We should all just embrace it, because we could just be living in plain bushes and not smart bushes, for goodness sakes. Like, let's all get in the smart bushes, We can pat them and communicate across the globe by patting our, the shrubbery. I think they're missing the whole militarism part. There is a difference in cloud computing. Like that's what we're talking about. It's an imperial project. Now, I mean, honestly, if we go back, like maybe if we go back to the Roman Empire, the aqueducts, right? Or some of the water systems are part of that Roman Empire. But I think it is very disingenuous for people to assert the technology without acknowledging its military origins, and to understand that in no way, shape, or form are the masses of people in control of this technology. In fact, everything that I'm saying is that they are going to remotely control your brain. I mean, who thinks that that's going to go well? I mean, I just don't, like, that's good technology. It's just how you use it. Like, well, who's using it? I mean, do we not know about IBM? Do we not know about DuPont? Do we not know about this history of domination? When has it ever gone well? So that's a cop-out, in my opinion. Like, that is just because I have to say, even in this blockchain space conversation that we were having earlier, people were essentially, all they wanted to do was say, well, if you're doing this, then we should throw out the internet. No one said, you know what, Allison, you're right. We should start to talk about that it is abhorrent to put children on blockchain and force them into coded behavior. You're right, Allison. We should talk about the spatial web being controlled by the military and the CIA. You're right, Allison. We should look into programmable money and what that means for poor people and UBI. No one is saying those things, and it pisses me off at this point. They just want to say, well, Allison, if you're doing this, we just are not. They never fucking engage in the material conversation I'm trying to have. They never want to talk about the spatial web. They never want to talk about the CIA. They never want to talk about Cardano feeding children's brains to the robots. For crying out loud, get over yourself, people, and be willing to have the hard conversation. It's not the same. So there, that's why I'm
okay. Take a deep breath.
I mean, if anybody on that blockchain conversation actually acknowledged any of the content of what I said and saying respect my principled position on this, then that would be a different thing, but they never do. They never do, because you know what? They can't. Because once you actually crack it open and look at it, it's too horrific, and then they can't stay in their comfortable place anymore.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at.
I think a lot about the technology as well, in terms of, how far is too far and how much is too much. And I always like the quote from Neil Postman. They always, when they talk about this, they always talk about what we gain, and they don't ever talk about what we lose. And then of course the military aspect of it as well. I don't think we should have ever split the atom.
Yeah, I mean, there's some really bad stuff that was done. It's been done for a while. And the bioethicists are the most unethical people out there. Like, if I actually felt that people were coming from a good place of interrogating the issues that were being raised, I have been raising these issues for years. The people who are pushing this and trying to shut me down to say we can't even have the conversation unless you're a purist are disingenuous, because they're not willing to have that conversation. They're not willing to have the conversation to say, well, I have my media platform, or I have my crypto nest egg, and to not say, by the way, that's going to create the spatial web where we end up living in the metaverse as, digital avatars, and that what that means for children and what that means for people who don't have access to those nest eggs and those things. And I think that's wrong. I'm willing to say
Okay,
that.
so another question we have here is, this is in quotes, nervous system manipulation by electromagnetic fields from monitors, which was, unquote, was patented in 2001. Do you have a current references to how this is being done today?
In the next set, I'll have some images about neural imaging. And I would say, again, I also have some quotes from someone who has been targeted by different technologies. And this isn't strictly just graphene or nanotech, but also they're looking at creating sort of integrated biomaterials, genetically modified materials that I think actually are harnessing elements of fungi, fungal spores and things that are being doped into people's systems that are also highly problematic. So I have some quotes from this person. But I would say at this point, this is a collective enterprise. When some of the things I'm laying out, like literally just start putting the pieces together, because you almost can't put any word along with graphene or biosensor and have like reams of medical papers come up. So it's something that at this point, if we're still stuck talking about masks and things, I think we've lost the narrative. Like we've lost the through line of the story. We've got to actually follow, not that that doesn't have anything to do with it, but once we understand that all of those materials and things are contaminated, and we know that, we need to move on to the next thing, which is this collective research around the nanotechnology sensors. And I do have, I guess I had that slide yesterday.
So Mary was asking about how the liberal media has been co-opted to completely snow, for example, the good-hearted people of Vermont to accept programs like the disadvantaged Black kids from Harlem in VR headsets college, which has taken over Marlboro's campus.
Yeah. And that's what I would say. Like, if we can bring this message of neural marketing, remote neural sensing, militarization, mind control to the people, if we can bring this to the people, I'm followed by a really diverse set of people, none of whom want this thing. And, I think it's really important to situate it not as an escape. How can we just ourselves escape, or escape for our family or community? But this is an assault on natural life itself by empire, period. And that we have to come at this from a place of global solidarity. And that's where I'm at in this, is that we have to, if we understand the context as I've laid it out as indigenous erasure, settler colonial AI, where the thing that's being erased now is non-synthetic life in its entirety, then that's a really unifying message, because nobody wants that. But we actually have to reshape the message in a way that clarifies the nature of the threat, and then provides a compelling counter narrative of a way of being that can start to heal the harm, to not diminish that the harm exists, but that can create and hold space to collectively those who were born into societies that caused the harm, those who are born into societies that upon whom the harm was inflicted, can unify. Because right now the identity politics and putting people in boxes makes that really, really, really difficult. And I don't have the answer other than to try to walk out there and do it. But I will say, I feel like the message that I'm putting out for those people who are in a position of hearing it is heard and recognized by a diverse group of people who appreciate having the information. And I think I would love to have translators. I would love to, as I said, have to people who can tell it as a song, as a poem, as an art, as a meal. Like, how do we tell this story in a better way? Because I do not claim in any way to be the best one to tell it. I tell it long form and in a way that people find scary, and we need to find a more palatable way to say it.
We just want sound bites, really. Come on.
Mean.
Right. Can we tell the story in pictures? Um, why do you think the alternative space won't cover the blockchain aspect of coercive surveillance that's underway, especially the anti-imperialists, especially the ones who are not ignorant?
Well, the friend I have who has done a lot of research around this understands energetics. And I think even Jason, we've talked about this before, that even non-digital currency is currency. It's current. There's word spells in there. There's there's a hold in that. So we get bound into our financial systems. A lot of our cultural systems are bound up in how we relate to money and the financial structures. And then it's just gotten more intense as you've gone digital. So that maybe you've gone digital credit cards, and then we're going digital crypto, and then we're going more and more digital programmable money tied to digital identity. And so I think once you have a personal connection to a crypto space, that it has a hold on you. It has an energetic hold that makes it difficult to break free from. And I'm not saying, but that's all I can say. I mean, I don't think at this point, like I got a little bit worked up there before, but I can't be the only one telling this piece of the story. We cannot move forward without understanding the spatial web and the internet of bio-nano things, and how the blockchain wallet is the portal to the metaverse. And that is what it is. It's not about your financial security. It is about capturing your life essence in a parasitic way that they're selling you on it as liberation, and feeding it to the board, period. And so, if there are people out there who want to take this material and overturn it and say, no, this isn't really happening, or this analysis isn't accurate, like, okay, do that. But as long as you're not talking about it, it's going to be increasingly obvious that there's an elephant in the room that you refuse to talk about. And then to me, all I can do is ask that people be discerning in what they consume. And what is being sometimes, and this is what I learned in the education space, watching Diane Ravitch, who was the misdirector extraordinaire, who harnessed up all of the social justice people and just walked them straight up to the edge of the cliff, was sometimes what's not being said is more important than what's being said. And all I can do is to remove plausible deniability. All I can do is that, and to tell my truth. And as Cliff says, you can't change people's minds. You just put your intention out in the world, and the intercessors take it where it needs to go. And you cannot change any single person yourself. But I show up and I tell what I know, and then you guys try to make sense out of it. That's the best I can do. But don't slander me and say that I've just somehow come onto blockchain recently and that is a personal beef, because I have proven very clearly that was wrong. And it didn't take little tiny bit of research to put in blockchain in my blog for someone who might characterize themselves an in-depth researcher to know that. And so I'm asking people, if you follow my work and accusations are made against me, things that you know to be lies, then I need you to start making your own principled decisions about how you proceed with your own media life. And I'm not here to win friends and influence people. I'm just here to say my truth. So
How to lose friends and upset people.
I know. I mean, everybody curates their social media life their own way.
So this was not a question, but it was a comment. But I thought I would just mention it because I think it's relevant. It is relevant. Someone mentioned the problem with blockchain crypto is that it's just too tempting to make money with it. And I think that's a big problem here, is with not just the crypto, but like our whole system. I think that's one of the major problems is our economic system actually rewards people for, going along with it. And that's the big elephant in the room, is like people are not going to challenge anything that threatens their income base. And that's anyways, I thought I'd mention that. I don't know if you want to say anything. Let me just read a couple more, and then what does it look like to have your physical, biological, digital identity linked in simple terms, and then I'll read one more. What about the people who are orchestrating all of this? Don't they poison their own bodies by all of this as well?
Well, I mean, I think I would say I would assume that there are countermeasures to counteract all of the things that are being inflicted on us, and the people who are running the show know that and have very access to those protocols. You know, who knows, all of those holistic doctors who are like, you know, ostensibly off might be off on some island, you know, caretaking for the the global elite now in their holistic practices. Who's to say? That is just pure conjecture. But so I think that we need, again, this is about having clarity around what is actually happening. And this is why people need to get clear on the germ theory, terrain theory, and understanding within terrain theory. It's not just Roundup, glyphosate, other chemicals, but it's actually the electrical signal, pulse signals are going to be part of that poisoning. And well, in terms of the what it looks like to have it linked, I mean, I think so let me see. So, I mean, the first digital identity, the prototype is in Ampli, which is the pre-K digital identity in South Africa. And again, this is all racialized, and you know, these targets are very much as much as we are feeling under pressure in, you know, the global north, in North America and Europe and other places. They really have big plans for Africa and India, and I think that there's a really intense interest in accessing the spiritual, the soulfulness element of those populations, and further mining them in the ways that they have been mined for other resources in this paradigm. But so South Africa was the first pilot, and if you imagine, they actually in their programming for Ampli talked about that their digital identity built social credit for the child. So I don't know exactly how that social credit manifested, but it was about data aggregation. And you can imagine the metadata attached. This was an attendance app. So every day that a child attended pre-K, the pre-K provider was reimbursed for a day of pre-K for that child. And the child was tracked with an online app. And we can imagine that would probably eventually be a QR code, scannable QR code, or eventually maybe, you know, an implantable sensor in there. And so there's a reimbursement built in for the preschool facility, but then the child, there would be metadata, right? So the metadata would be what day of the week was the app activated, what time of day was the app activated, profiles of other elements of use that are beyond just the click of yes or no that the child was in pre-K. There are layers of metadata. And so my question would be, you know, so that would be linked to an impact bond for universal pre-K. So that would be triggering impact payments for the investors. But then if the child is building digital identity, like what happens if they're sick and they miss a bunch of days, right? And then they go and they're trying to get into a private school, because a lot of schools there are private fee-based, and that the fees that their family has to pay are prorated based on that they're a compliant family to the program or not. And so that's sort of a conjecture, that last step, but that once you have all of your information logged, that's how it will be accessed. And I actually, if you haven't seen it, on my blog, wrenchingthegears.com, I made a 20-minute video called Your Permanent Record. And it's with construction paper cutouts. And it kind of talks about what the implications are of the spatial web, the Internet of Things, and people's reputation scores. And then what that will mean for people who are very rich and never have to avail themselves of outside investors or public services. And that they may be on the blockchain, but they'll never actually have to relieve their data. They'll just keep it locked up in a vault. So it won't have any impact on them. But somebody who has gone through a lot of trauma and is not really seen as a viable investment opportunity, then they're just going to have to leave all their data hanging open and like hope somebody will care enough to make them an investment market. And so I think I lay it out pretty clearly in that video what your permanent record looks like. And it's not, you're not becoming a data commodity for Empire because it's something that's going to ultimately benefit you. If anything, that data you will probably likely sell access to your data, which is already happening, like healthcare data as the next plasma bank, right? Like you'll get a UBI, which is a minimal amount to live on, but if you want anything else or you have some unexpected emergency, you're gonna have to start to sell your data from your blockchain identity to cover expenses.
Okay, so I have 4 more here. I'll read 2 and let
Okay.
you answer, and then I'll read 2 more, let you answer, and then we'll
Yeah,
just
I
go
was
back.
clearly not good with 4 yesterday. I could not keep 4 in my head.
Sorry. So yeah, we'll do these 4 and then we'll continue on and then we'll come back. Allison, if you could take over tech innovation, design, and use, what kind of tech would you stand behind? Me, biometric, organo, telepathic, quantum scalar. I think that's what this person was saying that they would support. So as I guess the question is there tech that you would support or do support?
I mean, for me, it feels like the cloud world is run by the military and mostly like white guy billionaires. So I mean, cloud-based stuff, that wouldn't be my bailiwick per se. So that's just kind of how, like, I mean, if there are people who are in that space and they feel like they can blunt this, that they can intervene and stop the neurotech brain harvest machine, go for it. Please. You know, I'm not, you know, here to be a total, like, I can be a purist for my position, but if you're out there and you see these harms happening and there's some way that you can put a stick in this thing and slow this thing down, I think that's good. Like, we all have to take our different positions depending on what our gifts are and where we are in the machine.
What is your best advice for those of us who are currently with babies, very young children? Where is energy best spent beyond protecting them as long as we can from the tech, allopathic medicines, etc.? So is there someone that's and there's actually, I'll read the next one because it relates to that one. What can I do if I'm in poverty on SSDI, already experiencing impact investment in their life?
Yeah.
So kind of the question is kind of what can people do when they're in like limited situations?
Well, I mean, I think part of it is that we have to surface what is actually happening, right? And appeal to our fellow beings, because while, you know, these crazy militarized hedge funds, you know, global debt finance operation feels like it's has this disproportionate control, we outnumber them way more, right? And, you know, even the communities of faith are all wrapped up in this, and even the progressives are wrapped up in this, and largely they're wrapped up in it because also large numbers of the people aren't speaking out about it. And I would say, and I had mentioned yesterday, that what they most want is for us to be in fear, and they want us to act out from a place of aggression. And so then we shouldn't try to do those things. Not to say that we shouldn't, we're not going to have bad days and things are going to get us down, but build community with like-minded people in person as much as possible. Live creatively and joyfully, because again, that's what they mostly don't want. And I would say for people who are already in the zone, because I am here because I have had teachings from people who are navigating the intentionally manufactured broken benefit system. You know, my good friend, you know, taught me about the Obama phones, which helped me better understand digital currency and programmable money and the impact scheme. We need to have unity around this, but right now, so much of those communities they don't understand the new nature of the threat. So I would say, if you do, is there a way of building community with like-minded souls? And then how do we bring this story out into the public in a way that can be digested, that can be processed, that can invite people in to help? And I'm not here to say I don't really have all of the answers. I think everybody has to work out their place. You know, clearly, if I could like solve global poverty with being on a podcast, like, sure, I would do one 24/7. I'm not, you know, deluding myself that being on this podcast is necessarily fundamentally going to change the problem. But I think we can't change the problem until we understand it and then build a different narrative and tell the different story and tell that story with the way we live our lives and with our gifts. And so that's what I would ask for people. Like yesterday, I talked about, an acquaintance who went and did a dandelion revocation, at the Moonshot Project, and which in and of itself was a very brave thing to do energetically, to go into that space and to sort of diffuse that. We have to understand what our measures of success are going to be and define those for ourselves in reasonable ways, and then live our lives as best alignment with those principles. And not everyone is going to have the same principles or have the same gift or have the same outlook. So I can only do it for me. And I can do it in ways that maybe give other people ideas about how they can do it for themselves.
Well, I actually have I have the answer. I wrote it on a Post-it note. I'm just looking for it. It's somewhere on my desk. I really need to organize this thing because I think it would really help.
Yeah.
So I'll just do one more. It actually relates to what we were talking about, but this person was asking, Samuel was asking, do we have any recommendations for forming communities or for finding others? And I mean, we've done a little bit of that on Facebook, but yeah, I don't know. Do you have ideas on that?
Well, I've been kind of slack on it the last couple of months, but like over the winter, we just had soup get-togethers, and we put it out, and these were people who were geographically close. We went on hikes. I would say I still think that these little ceremonies are quite beautiful. I spoke with someone last night about it who was, feeling really anxious, and I said, I think stuff with water is pretty amazing, and things with music and things with food. And so, like, sometimes it's putting your invitation out into the world, right? Like, yeah, I remember talking to somebody in March in New York, and they said, I know you do soup and that's pretty good, but I'm a DJ and I'm that's my gift. And so I'm going to have a dance party. And I'm like, yeah, totally have a dance party. Right. So see something that fits with you and don't wait for the thing, have it, have that dance party, have that potluck, have that hike, have that meditation, go out and be silly, do wacky things. Like even my little rituals, like for me, I keep saying they feel like equal parts prayer and performance art and white magic or something, but that makes me feel like I have some control. And while I'm doing it in that moment, it makes me feel connected to other people who have sent me things that I'm using and putting out in the world in that good way. So I guess that's what I would say is figure out what are your gifts. Figure out an invitation that leaves some options open and put it out there, and then see who responds. And don't expect that if you don't get 50 people that it's a failure. It could be the universe only wants it to be 3 people or a couple people, but that's what it should be. And whatever it is the way it's supposed to be.
So I think we're caught up. Yeah, you want to just continue with your presentation?
Yeah. So let me Google Chrome. Okay. All right, so we ended up with thoughts on graphene. So moving along. So this is the information that is about like the biosensor technology and reactors. And so I will say, if people, I do need to come up with a book list. I don't have one about quantum computing, but I do have a lot of books that have influenced my thinking. And one of them, and I have some images of it in here, is a recommendation that was given to me called The Diamond Age, which is Neil Stephenson. And it was written in 1995, and it's prescient in all of these areas. But the key storyline is that there's a bespoke engineer of nanotechnology designs a primer, but this primer is actually essentially an iPad that is accessed with a tutor in it. And the tutor is a person who is remote and who, with sensor technology like motion capture technology, is acting out and teaching this young girl in another country. So the girl is in sort of a country in Asia, and the teacher is on the west coast of the US, and the teacher is what's called a reactor. And so it's like an actor, but in one of these simulation games. And so I think increasingly the use of biosensors and motion capture technology and digital twinning is about almost manipulating people through electrical remote stimulation to be sort of like puppets under control of the military industrial complex. And that these, as people have reached out to me to share their stories, is that this is what they're experiencing. And I think it is a lead up to this sort of mass use of nano electronic systems to compel people through digital nudges, being like literal electronic sequencing, whether it is causing pain or done in ways that people may not even be aware of, to influence their behavior in ways that are either tied to impact investment deals or behavior that will allow the AI to collect the data that it wants to pursue this campaign to conquer life. So, okay, so this is the book, Neil Stephenson's The Diamond Age. And I mentioned before, I did give a long talk in Tucson, which Jason, you so generously filmed, that people can look at, but a lot of this was about gamification and linking social impact finance to turning, with augmented reality, the whole world into a literal game, and then placing people through tracking them with digital identity systems as players in the game. And so this does connect very directly to this 1997 gathering in which the entertainment industry and the Defense Department industry came together. And what was birthed out of that was the University of Southern California's Institute for Creative Technologies. And you know, there's a lot going on in Southern California with the intersection of the Hollywood and the military, and also UCLA, which is also in the general area. Deborah Estrin, who is a major player in the biosensor space and health data analytics, and is part of the Commons Project, and out on Roosevelt Island, the Cornell Technion, the small data lab is there. So that Southern California military entertainment nexus is really important. And I mentioned about the Raptors. So the Raptors are in the book, The Diamond Age. So if you understand this idea of these Raptors almost being like steered beings, and maybe that steering is happening through painful interventions, and then maybe that steering is happening in a way that's so subtle that you may not even be aware of it yourself. But this is a diagram that I think is really, really helpful for me about how cybernetics works. And it comes from the Greek, I guess, Kubernetes, which is steering. And in Latin, it's governor. So if you understand the problematic governors in these equations, or the governor of on a car, it's very interesting, the wordplay that is involved. But that the idea is that you have a sensor and there is a set goal, and then it re-engineers based on directing the activity towards the intended goal. And so this image here is of a ship, and the diagonals are winds and tides, and there is a course that is set for that ship. There's a harbor there. And if you understand someone's life pathway, right? If you understand a social impact finance deal that is connected to directing people along a certain line of engineering their behavior to get to a certain outcome, and that, again, as I mentioned in the past, that hedge funds are placing bets on whether or not you will actually get to this harbor, or if you will get to it in the right way, that, you know, the boat gets off of course, and then the errors get corrected. And so what I really want to make this very strong point now is that as we understand the idea of the universal empire of breaking the code of life, of steering human beings through, as I mentioned yesterday, that selfish ledger, the Google Lamarckian, code breaking the intelligent design of life to become God, that they're going to start, and increasingly through AI, put all living beings on courses that will let them get the data that they most desire, and that they will be aggregating that data not only through wearable technology, which is what I was really focused on maybe the past 6 or 8 months, but through biosensor technology. And that is the stuff that is learning you at the level of your own neural function, is creating that neural library that creates the substrate independent mind that they can then feed into the singularity to trigger this code breaking. And so I think it's really important to know that you're not going to get to pick your harbor. this ship isn't getting to decide what harbor it goes to. There's not, 5 different harbors here, and they get to pick a course. The course is set, and the course is set because through the lockdowns and through the overall surveillance state that's being imposed, and through the digital currency and through the biosensors, the course will be set for you by someone else. That will be set for you, whether that course is education, mental health, health behaviors, housing, food, what have you, is that you are being steered as a puppet. So this is an image, an infographic that is from this article from 2019 called "The Development of Neural Interfaces in Energy Harvesters Towards Self-Powered Implantable Systems for Healthcare Monitoring and Rehabilitation." And again, this is always framed as dual use, again, that you want healthcare monitoring or rehabilitation. So they will use this, these kinds of technologies that they will lead with people with neuromuscular issues, people with strokes, people with diabetes, people with Parkinson's, other sorts of medical things that, again, you would not be in a position of saying, wait a minute, that is a questionable technology. But then what happens when you move these sensors, which are self-powered, that are creating their own power, and then you implant them in a person that's perfectly healthy for purposes of social control. So I will just read in case it's not clear. I'll read some of the images. So this is the implantable system. This is how the system can be stimulated. Electrically, okay, that could hurt a lot. Optically, that is through light. Chemically, magnetically, and again, this comes into play when we're talking about the graphene oxide and the magnetism, and ultrasound, so through frequencies. So you can activate this implanted sensor in a variety of ways. The data can be transmitted through ultrasound, wires, or radio frequency. So again, this is about inputs and outputs, the communication theory, information theory. That the power source for the system can come from its own energy harvesting, or batteries, or even powered through the frequencies themselves, so that you could zap it, I guess, through to get it repowered, or through frequency and ultrasound, okay? But that it could also have energy harvest from the person themselves with how the biosensor operates within their being. And then what are the senses that what is the data that it can take in? It can take in electrical information, again, that's the neural function, pressure, biomarkers, and temperature. So these are all these different sensors. And if you understand that the biosurveillance state is linked to health systems engineering, right? And that the goal is to have lots of us with lots of sensors. The more sensors, the more data, the more faster their code breaking will happen. That's additionally why the whole idea of the dangers of asymptomatic people who are perfectly healthy, why they would need to get a sensor too, is that you can never tell that you're healthy, because health is increasingly going to be determined by the experts, and the experts are going to have that determination guided by the sensor networks and the electrical impulses. And then that is all dealing with electrical models and simulation models, as I talked about yesterday at the University of Chicago. They can use their electron microscopes, they can use their algorithms, they can essentially recreate the world to be whatever they want. They can engineer it in virtual space, and then have those virtual worlds have direct consequences for our own physical material world. And I think that the sensors are for building out the digital twins, and that the electronic health records and blockchain are part of that. So many of you are familiar with the work of James Giordano, and when I talk about dual use, that is one of his central concepts. He is a professor of bioethics at Georgetown, and he says many really scary things on YouTube videos, which makes you wonder how it is that he's saying all these things on YouTube, and what are the things that they're not even saying on YouTube. But he is sort of the front face for the neuro weapons and ostensibly ethics of the neuro weapons, but no one's saying that maybe we should just actually not have any neuro weapons, that the future of warfare is information, and information is actually down to your neural function. That is a kind of information, is how that's transmitting. So when we think about cyber warfare at this point, we're thinking about potentially hackable human beings down to a nano electronic level that can be used to cause harm and to engineer people in ways that they have no idea that they're being engineered. I will say, I think I mentioned before that the United Nations General Assembly Human Rights Council in March of 2020 was gathering information, a special report on torture and punishment. Again, do I harbor any ideas that anything significant will come of this? I do not, and it could just be a fishing expedition to see what information people are willing to share about this. And yet, that said, that there is documentation in that document on cyber torture. And I will just read this section aloud. It says, a particular area of concern, which does not appear to have received sufficient attention, is the possible use of various forms of information and communication technology, cyber technology, for the purposes of torture. Although the promotion, protection, and enjoyment of human rights on the internet has been repeatedly addressed by the Human Rights Council, torture has not. And so they are acknowledging this is a real and present concern. In this, this is further on in the report, I'll just read this as well. In practice, cyber technology already plays the role of an enabler in the perpetration of both physical and psychological forms of torture, most notably through the collection and transmission of surveillance information and instructions to interrogators through the dissemination of audio or video recordings of torture or murder for the purpose of intimidation, or even streaming child sexual abuse or on-demand voyeuristic clients. Increasingly, it is also through remote control, manipulation of stun belts, medical implants, and conceivably nanotechnological or neurotechnological devices. So, here they are actually acknowledging the existence of this very real concern. And I would say increasingly from what I've heard from individuals is that when they're talking about surveillance situations, is that this is becoming almost a game, like a gig economy platform type TaskRabbit work, where civilians are integrated into the game, sort of like LARPing, live action role play, where they become engaged in harassment of targeted individuals in conjunction with these augmented reality sensing systems, which is pretty terrible. So this is a letter that was submitted to this UN report. Interestingly, it's out of Madrid. So there's a particular organized group in Spain, which again is where La Cinque Columna is based out of. I don't think they're in Madrid, but they are in Spain. And this was in June of 2020 of last year. And they have gathered a group. Their group is called Victims of Electronic Torture. And they said that we are currently 145 affiliated victims through our website, but they know that there's many more people. So I think we have to understand the cybernetics and the neuro warfare and the neuro weapons as graphene becomes more and more wrapped up into the equation and the digital twinning in the conversation. So these are some messages that were shared with me, and I asked if I had permission to share them publicly for someone who has been targeted for about 6 years and is very thoughtful about integrating new information, integrating the information I have shared about gamification and finance into their lived experience. And so I will just read a couple of these. A global racktive using rackers like me to play with, using a massive on-demand army of players to obey your command, make your moves to affect the rackers, using the facade of Homeland Security to do it. That's basically it. And again, all of these systems are embedded in Department of Homeland Security and the fusion centers. The collaboration between Department of Defense, military, Homeland Security, gaming, entertainment, big tech, gig workers, gamers, citizens on patrol. Yes, that is the big picture that has materialized through my experience and research. And they are scouting for raptors and infiltrating them for play constantly to feed on the game and to capitalize, because the game is always getting bigger. And I would say infiltrating them is really getting sensor technology into people who are innocent bystanders and victims in all of this, and to see how they operate in the game. The marriage between wargaming and entertainment gaming, using federal funding to support it all. Wow, the game is built in to all the legitimate research and development for multiple sectors. So again, that is talking about how many of these things seem socially acceptable on the surface, but the dual use functions that are involved are horrific, and very few people in the spaces of academia, nonprofits, philanthropy, the military are willing to talk about it. Now, I mentioned before that I feel strongly that there are some particular data sets that are available as people transition into sleep. I've had several people tell me that sleep is where they are particularly targeted with frequencies remotely. And here this person says, and yes, nighttime is their major game time because the ad hoc networks descend over us in darkness. Every single night there's an operation over my location, any location that creates a web network of avionics around me, and it follows. And so I guess we know recently about the whole edge network computing around Amazon and their edge computing systems, their Ring doorbells and Alexas, and how those are all being integrated. So if we imagine that as part of the frequency weapon system, I think that's important to consider the role that that may play. And that this person, as part of their colonization by these technologies, which are both, I believe, nanoelectronic and fungal, they talk about almost a metamorphosis that I had black coming out of my fingers and skin during my metamorphosis period. I had slivers of black buried under my skin. The corners of my eyes and cheekbones turned blue. So there are very specific physiological things that were happening that were part of, again, when I talked about yesterday, the continuum of the human computing interface in this Internet of Bio-Nano things. There's humanizing the robots and roboticizing the people, and they're through the sensor and Internet of Body systems that present in different ways. And I believe that that is, more gallons is a manifestation of that. So, again, I just touched base. A lot of the people who've reached out to me to talk and engage with me on my research have been people who have been interested in Steiner's outlook on energetics and this idea of the etheric double in sleep and accessing that part of people's life cycle. To me, feels like there's something significant to that process, that's something that they're particularly interested in, is engaging people in that way and trying to gather that data through sensor networks. This feels a little bit out of order. I guess this is leftover. I apologize. I was sort of reshuffling some of my slides to have them make better sense. But the evolution 2.0 that we had talked about yesterday, the great contest to unlock the key code of life, to figure out what the intelligent design system was, and to revisit Darwinian evolution, that was undertaken by Perry Marshall. One of the judges in that competition, this evolution 2.0, is George Church. And George Church has been a central player at Harvard for many years. Dennis Noble, he was out of Oxford, and then there's somebody out of Florida State University. And I would say, Florida is a major center also for the military and for simulation and for space work and for computing and blockchain. So it's interesting, this assortment of judges. I'm just going to read out loud a little bit of the LinkedIn profile for Dr. Church so that you have a sense of, given all of what I've laid out so far, how his involvement in this contest to unlock life relates to the biotech nanotech space. So he was a scientific advisor to 23andMe. He was a scientific advisor to the Odin project, and that is kits to help consumer make organisms at home. Like, this is sort of DIY biohacking. He was a co-founder of eGenesis, which is gene editing. He was a financial advisor to the Personal Genome Project. Again, this predator energy is trying to get all of the genomic data. He has been a professor of genetics at Harvard since 1986. He worked a co-founder of Editas Medicine, which is CRISPR gene editing. He actually, Harvard Medical School is where he was a professor. He was a director of research at MIT Media Lab, which we know is the war machine, is central to digital currency, social robotics, all these sorts of things. And he was a founding member of the WIS Institute, which is bio-inspired technologies, which includes robotic bees, that they've developed these robotic bees. He was recently a speaker at the Unite to Prevent conference, which was in May at the Vatican. And this is Breakthroughs in Medicine. So that conference was also attended by quite a number of high-level people of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We're high presence there. We know that they're working with the Vatican Bank. And he was, I guess, involved with Amgen and took money from Jeffrey Epstein. And so these people are serious players in the space. And if we want to somehow imagine that these technological systems are here for the advancement of humanity, I would ask you to maybe revisit your structural analysis, because these people are about harvesting life as livestock. Literally, they think about us as talking animals. And this level of domination of nature, I think, is an abomination, and in something that many states have chosen to build their economies on biotech and synthetic biology and nanotechnology. And I think the cost for that is going to be that we're going to be forced to live in a virtual world run by the CIA. So I'll pause here for a second. Are there any questions, Jason, or? I don't know, Jason, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. I just had to turn my mics back on. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Is it useful to have a pause, or I don't know?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Does any?
Okay. Yeah. So actually, I don't have any questions. So yeah,
right.
Just carry on.
All right. Well, you can see, I know we've had some conversations about targeted individuals in the past, but I feel like looking at the nanotechnology and looking at the UN and knowing what they are talking about with neuroweapons, it's really important to really sit with what that would mean, and knowing sort of our history of, MK Ultra and non-consensual experimentation, what's actually happening, and that those people's experience actually might help us a lot in understanding how to navigate it going forward. If part of what's happening is that we're being dosed with environmental toxins that experience actually may be very helpful in figuring out how we proceed. So let's see. Okay, so this is digital twinning, human augmentation. This is just an image I had. I think MIT is at the center of so much of this. Harvard sets the policy and does the money with Harvard Business School, although MIT Sloan does quite a bit with the money in digital currency too. But all of this stuff is coming out of the war machine. This seminar interested in human augmentation, and then the question is, are we going to be living in a world where we become augmented through nanotechnology? And I had that clip yesterday with the gentleman, Lincoln Cannon, saying maybe we won't even recognize this technology. Just because we don't see the technology doesn't mean it's not present, that we may be being augmented. And I know Alana Freeland talks about this through nanorobotics, and that we may already fully be there at some level on the continuum of cybernetics. I will say the thing that really disturbed me about this particular image was that the underline here is that we're advancing this idea not just of exoskeletons, which we saw on the Moonshot project, and limb prostheses and neural implants, and which is kind of like the Neuralink, which I think is a distraction largely, but on social emotional prosthetics, prostheses, and cognitive prostheses. I don't say that very well, sorry about that. But so that they would create intermediate interfaces for our neurons, right? Into how we process our emotions and our social. And I would say, we need to have a really serious ethical conversation in the disability rights community. I would hope that this would be on their radar, on community of people on the spectrum. What does it mean to have an outside force, an outside mechanism engineer your social emotional life or your cognitive process, if it's perhaps done without your consent? If you're being governed, if you are experiencing cybernetics and you do not get to pick your own harbor, that is being done for you, that the constraints of the world are being set for you, that you cannot be the you that you were born to be because of this, then we should be having some really, really serious conversations. And I've said in the past, some of the things that really we get to this point, we're like almost a year and a half into this, right? And some things we need to start letting go of. And some of that stuff is Bill Gates, is all eyes on Bill Gates, or all eyes on Jeffrey Epstein, or all eyes on Klaus Schwab. Sure, they're a part of this, but they're not all of this. And so there are many people operating in the background operating that deserve more attention and that we need to dig into more. Among them, Pierre Omidyar, whose wife Pam has actually developed patient compliance, neuroscience patient compliance labs, which is really important as we understand that Pierre Omidyar himself has advanced the idea of good ID, or a universal world digital identity. And so you put those two things together, and he was actually looking in great detail at Medicaid, at preschool, at prenatal care, and working in South Carolina. This Goal Mama app that he developed was part of the prototype for Pay for Success Finance for prenatal care in South Carolina. But when you deconstruct some of the symbols, I asked some folks, what does this symbol look like to you, right? And you've got the O and the N for Omidyar Network, but it's far more than that. It is on, right? And in that, you've got this idea also of reproduction. You've got, a phallus, you've got a womb, you've got potentially a middle finger. You've got, if you break the O, could the O be a U for United Nations? And then you've got the computational, like the on button of the computer, the on off button. And so again, within cybernetics, understanding that the impact space and neural prosthetics are about being able to turn you off and on at will, and your social emotional life and your neural life off and on at will remotely. This is all militarized. Again, I'm just beating the drum, so to speak, on this, but these are a couple reports, and I'll share back the slide deck, but this is the UK Ministry of Defense. It's on a lot of people's radar. They're talking about human augmentation as a foresight document, where this infographic here talks about the physical, social, and psychological. So if you're talking about psychological augmentation, right? Like all of the horrors of mainstream psychiatric practice and medicalized psychiatric practice and what that now looks like with nanotech. But in this space, I will just read off, they've got the exoskeleton, teleexistence, which is central to this remote robotic labor, putting your consciousness into a robot, a sensory augmentation, and I think that's, a la the bionic woman, but who is in control of how that is augmented? Many people in the targeted space, their senses are hijacked and used to harm and cause pain in them. Remote neural stimulation, navigating all of this through an augmented reality framework. And then central to this is, I think, channeling your frequencies and the electronic programming in alignment with your genetic material, the documentation they have on your bioinformatics, and tuning the brain interfaces at the nano level, whether that be strictly through nanowires or nano computing systems or associated pharmaceuticals that go along with that. And many of these programs have been already undertaken in the military with soldiers in the Super Soldier program. I've spoken before about digital twins, the digital twin computing, and with Licklighter, if what you're going for is some sort of intergalactic experience, they're not going to take our physical bodies. Anyone who's traveling off the surface of the planet is likely going to be traveling as some little vial of DNA with computational information encoded. And in the augmented reality space, they're not just engineering us, they're engineering the whole world. And that's what they're about. And imagine how much effort that's going to take. And I've talked about this in the past, that the whole education space is being re-engineered so that children will have to code this metaverse and secure it with cybersecurity and power it with their piezoelectric energy harvest. But they imagine augmented reality as these layers of GIS, and that we are just one little item in one layer of the code, of the super code that they're looking to climb to get to the top. So this is from Nippon Telegraph and Telephone. They're central in operating in the digital twinning space. And again, they're a partner in the Moonshot project. This is from a document from March 31st of this year, 2021. So they're talking about digitizing model universes as the metaverse at different scales. And so they have levels all the way from a fish in a tank, where they coordinate time, light, water, and the fish. All of these are independent variables that are coded for. And then it goes all the way up to a person's room. And again, time is being coded into this. And I know some of us on social media have been talking about manipulations of time and the environment. noise, sunshine, ventilation, all the way up to what a neighborhood and what that looks like to digitally twin an entire neighborhood. So we have to understand that the nano use that is, I think, going to be very integrated with the graphene is about developing these really, really robust models through quantum computing to try to get to the metaverse, to try to, again, get to this point of breaking the code of life. I don't know why this image doesn't show up, but I touched on before Stafford Beer is one of the people working in the cybernetic space, and he was doing management systems engineering, social systems engineering. And again, if we look at the politics of the left, and this is where the space that I had occupied, but I was often asking people once I understood about blockchain and impact investing, if what they were building was building a blockchain socialism, right? Or a planned economy built on blockchain where AI was going to make the decisions, the cybernetics. That all goes back to Chile and Allende bringing in Stafford Beer, right? And so at the time, we know that the coup was bad, but then what was Allende doing if he was bringing in like a colonial presence of an English cyberneticist into this country with this planned economy? To me, that's certainly not an indigenous like approach or a natural systems engineering approach. It's definitely an AI model. And granted, what they were actually able to accomplish in their limited time really just looked like something on paper, and it wasn't real actually. But even that they were thinking that that was their goal, I think is important historic context, is a digitally modeled society, that the cybernetics is everything from, the fish, the koi. That's really interesting now that I think of the fish on that other slide. The Japan Moonshot Project, my friend who went to the lobby, they had a display about koi. And in their cyberspace, a lot of it actually talked, they were creating augmented reality representations of koi and fish, which is interesting now that I think about it. Oh, there it is. Okay. So there is their project CyberSyn was what they had in Chile. And it's interesting because this room, even though those little remote controls didn't operate anything other than slides, is that it was a hexagon. And again, we know that the hexagon is the cube, inverted is blockchain, is hexing, is hive mind, is all of those things. So again, here it's just a little bit more on Stafford Beer. He had his 1959 book, Cybernetics and Management. And that was a really significant book. And I think it's very telling as we understand behavioral economics, the Internet of Bodies, and nanotechnology. Okay, so I'm gonna read this whole section out because this is from the Nippon Telegraph and Telephone Digital Twinning Report from this March. And I think it's really important to understand because I could always imagine, to me, I feel like your blockchain identity, your digital wallet, your e-wallet is almost like the umbilical cord between the material you that lives in the real physical world that will be, if we don't push back, increasingly constrained, and the digital you representation that lives in the metaverse. And maybe that metaverse is, managed by Adobe file software, and you port through the spatial web into different parts. But that there is a link, and that, it's not that which stays in Vegas stays in Vegas. Like that which happens in the metaverse ripples through into the real world, and vice versa, it ripples out. So I was pretty clear on the fact that how you operated in the physical world, which they called mixed reality, would then be represented through physics in the digital world. But what this section is actually talking about is the fact that your digital twin could operate independently of your consciousness. And then what they are looking to do is somehow be able to represent that activity, that growth, those accomplishments back, reverberate it back from the metaverse onto the living person, which is pretty incredible if you think about it. So that's why I'm just going to read this out loud because I think it's really important and it's current research. Human digital twins will live in a virtual society, even though they are connected to humans in the real world. Okay, so they're in the virtual world, they're connected to us in the real world. Therefore, unlike conventional agent models, and that's used for AI machine learning, that are completely separated from the real world, a human digital twin should have a mechanism to reflect real world information at appropriate times. And what I'm theorizing is that your blockchain wallet is that portal that is going to connect. It is that is the mechanism. And that is why digital ID will have no one left behind, because everyone must be pushed into the metaverse. The data could be reflected by being overwritten with real world information. On the other hand, because the process cannot be directly obtained, we should implement some update strategies. For example, the process could be tuned at a predetermined time according to the data stored after a previous date. So it's like reconciling the information, like you have these updates, refresh the process. Another example is a kind of online update in which the process would be updated according to errors between predictive data and observed data. So they're doing predictions about what they think you'll do versus what you actually did. Similar to predictive coding in the human brain. So that's a really interesting framing, right? So let me just say that again. Another example is a kind of online update method in which the process would be updated according to errors between predicted data using the current process and observed data, similarly to predictive coding in the human brain. Okay, so they're making these predictions, and it's happening at the level of brain function. This would provide a kind of mechanism that a human digital twin could grow and develop according to the experiences of the corresponding individual in the real world. So as the human evolved in intellectual understanding or in their physical nature, that would be reflected in the digital twin. Okay, so this is the kicker. There remains an open issue of how to define and implement a growth mechanism of corresponding real human according to the experience of the human digital twin in virtual society. So I just want to sort of restate that. What they're talking about is they have a pretty good beat on how to make the digital twin updating and reflecting of the human. But what they're actually interested in is figuring out a way to use development of the digital twin, which may happen somehow independently of the real human, and reflect that back into the actual human being. And I think that's a pretty intense prospect. And I don't know if you remember, there was a terrible Michael Keaton movie like years ago called Duplicity or something, where there was a guy and he was he turned into a house husband and he felt overwhelmed. And so he started making copies of himself to do the various work so he could, do the things he wanted to do. And yet by the end, there were like 4 or 5 different copies, and increasingly each of them was degraded and dysfunctional in various respects. But that's what I'm feeling, is that based on some of the assertions of Lincoln Cannon and then the Mormon Transhumanism Association, is that you could have infinite numbers of copies and that they would all be individuated, and then maybe they would follow their own recourse. And so that is a pretty intense thing to think about. So I guess maybe I can stop here for a moment and just see if anybody has thoughts about that. I don't know. To me, that was kind of a jaw dropper, is that once you get to the digital twinning, that what happens with the digital twin, their intention is to try to have it reflect back on you, and that they could potentially use remote neural control to reprogram you in ways that you would not be aware of.
So we haven't had any questions of late. If you do have questions, please post them in the comment section and I will make sure to ask them. One thing that was said that I thought was interesting was regarding George. This person said, George is doing interesting work. It's just going to end up in the wrong hands once again. There's nothing wrong with unlocking life as long as you uphold it, respect it, and revere it. And I had made the comment that I don't think that unlocking life is respectful in and of itself. But like, I also made the point
taking a crowbar in there, I think.
Right. Then I made the comment that the naivety of science to think that their work will not end up in the wrong hands when the wrong hands are the ones funding them is kind of incredible to me. I don't know. It just seems like they just focus on their work and there's not a lot of thought about the larger implications of it until after, you have like Oppenheimer, had a conscience.
Well, I would say, I think they know what they're doing. I mean, these are very bright people. I mean, I think part of it is understanding within imperialist context, which it seems like is not everyone's lens. But if you look at it from a lens of empire and a lens of digital slavery, Most of these Ivy League universities that were asserting are asserting these, both the policies around predatory finance, debt finance, and these innovative technologies were all universities that were involved in the slave trade and the finance of the slave trade, Brown, Georgetown, Harvard. I mean, MIT was later, but like if they had some historic context, I think they would understand how the machine works. But once you're credentialed by the machine, you will operate within the construct of the machine itself, and you won't have a lot of, I mean, the United States is built on meritocracy, right? Like we're supposed to believe that all the people who are in the Ivy League are there because they're the best and smartest and they work the hardest, and not that it's about power and longstanding networks of power. Anyway, that's me. Not everyone agrees. I get that.
Someone asked, what do we do without what do we do if we don't have a digital identity? I think that that's going to be an issue, right? Because it's going to be forced on us, or we're going to be basically excluded from life. Is that something you've thought about? Like how do we deal with that?
Well, I think part of it is that people need to know the consequences of what the digital identity is meant to do. If people understood that the point of the digital identity was digital twinning and was to create global investment markets that would put us through our paces in smart militarized environments, we would all refuse it. But right now, like Colorado, they're just saying, hey, just get on the blockchain with your digital driver's license, right? Like, here, do you want this subsidy for pre-K? Like, it's a stealth program. These things are stealth programs. They are not being offered up with people do not have the full picture. This is not informed consent. None of this is happening with informed consent at all. And I would say these gatekeepers at the top who are running these programs, who are not being responsible for, like, they want to isolate themselves and work in a very narrow bandwidth so that they don't have to take responsibility for what they're building. But I think if what we're saying is that we're going to put babies on blockchain and track them with Lena smart shirts and then on surveillance play tables, and then with stimuli hybrid schools in a game with a floating panopticon eyeball over them, that's a horror. Nobody can frame that as liberation. And I think most people, but again, people and all the people who want to ask me about what to do, I would say, are you telling this story in your community? Because I cannot do it by myself. Like, there is a relatively small group of us who are telling an anti-imperialist, anti-militarism attempt to assert the legitimacy of natural life and healing past trauma. This message needs to be widely understood. And I feel like a lot of people want to outsource their responsibility or their agency to someone else to tell them what to do. We're all figuring it out. I don't have any credentials, and I'm not here to tell anybody what to do. I mean, people say, oh, you should do this to wake more people up. I'm not here to wake you up. I am here because I have a message to tell people, and then we also need to ripple it out. The ripples can be massive, but we have to actually feel confident enough to do the work and to question, and to question beyond, like, we've been conditioned, and this is all behaviorism, this is all operant conditioning with Skinner, that's being very much within the entire media construct, to say, this is how we talk about this thing that's happening to us. We talk about it in these channels. We talk about it in these parameters. We talk about, these are the people we listen to. We don't talk about it in these other ways. If you start to talk about it in these other ways, then you're off the thing. Like, if you veer off the course, and now you're no longer talking about gain of function bioweapons or these sorts of mass genocide, people aren't doing that. And we need to have we need to have more flexible thought. We need to realize that we're being conditioned even within our place of resistance of how to see this thing. And I think that, and I don't know that I'm doing it effectively, but that this series of talks, and I think honestly we're going to have to go into another one because I'm not going to get to MITRE today, but within this landscape, this is going to unlock a lot of avenues for research for other people. I mean, and I'm not saying this is just me because I'm sharing research that's been shared with me by a number of other people, but if we start to go in the direction of electrical systems engineering and terrain theory, that is a very rich theme to get into to really figure out what's going on. And I would say we need a balance of research so that we know how to strategize, and then collective gathering, ceremony, love, art, creativity to balance it out. And that's what I try to do. That's what I try to model.
Yeah. It's also like people are trying to get Descartes before Horace. That's a philosophy joke. But no, people are getting ahead of themselves, I think, too, with which I think you're right. You can't solve a problem without understanding what the problem is. And the overwhelming majority, even of people within the resistance space, or whatever you want to call it, don't actually understand very key elements of what's actually happening. And so, yeah, educating people is part of it's not the whole thing, but it's a huge piece of the process, part of the process. And so, yeah, I think that's a good point, is continue to educate yourselves and others about the problem. Yes, that's not the only thing we need to do. We need to do more, but that's a huge piece of it. And we can't go to the next step without this step. So, that's my opinion.
And I think on the digital identity, not having one, like when the push comes to shove, I think it's going to be not unlike the medical protocol. Like, you're going to have to, like, those of us who know are going to have to know. And then those of us who refuse, yeah, there's going to be consequences. There's probably going to be terrible consequences. And I can't stand in anyone else's shoes. I mean, I feel like at this point, I've said in the past, those of us, I'm in my 50s, we're disposable people to this machine. They're not really counting on us adding a lot of added value to their equation. So if I can, from a principled place, try to surface this in some way publicly, and increasingly I would love to do it more publicly in my own city with people who know what social impact investing is about and who know what digital surveillance are about. The people that I've organized with, they're still not there. They're still not there yet. I hope that I can get there with them. But I can't come and beat them over the head and say, you have to listen to me. They actually have to want to come and do it. And I can't. So until then, I'm going to still keep just doing what I'm doing and doing things individually and in small groups. But don't put babies on blockchain. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, and I had someone who was in the birth working world just say, well, there's really nothing we can do about that. That's just too bad. Like, we just can't, like, there's nothing to be done. And I'm like, come on. Like, what if every single person who was in the holistic health, doula, midwife space did a campaign to say it's abhorrent to put children on blockchain? What if every single parenting blog, social media influencer came and said, we will not enslave our children to the metaverse? That could be a thing. I can't make you do that. I can say, I really think this is the thing the stand that should be taken, but so far, I don't see a lot of people picking up that banner.
So someone said that they really want to tell the story and to share, but they don't know where to start. So I don't really know what to say. They just mentioned we need to keep telling the story. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's a poem. Like, I have that infographic. Just like print it out and think about it. Like, I'm not saying copy those words, but what does that mean to you? Like, is there something that, like, go out into the world? Sometimes, like, I've been trapped in my house too much the last 2 or 3 days. Like, I went to the creek and the lightning bugs came to me. And I said, we have to do this because of lightning bugs and luciferays and their lights, and they shouldn't be in a jar. And so there's things that come to you in the world that just, the universe will give you things. I mean, I need to write that. I really need to write a story about the lightning bugs. And you can write a story about the lightning bugs that reflects back into cybernetics and harvest and harm and domination. Like, you can totally write a lightning bug story about that, I think. I mean, not that you should. I should write that story. Like, that's a different way of doing it. It's different than this. And Lynn Davenport, Lynn could, like, totally sing a song about lightning bugs in a jar in Dallas, I'm sure.
We'll just need new patches. We'll have to get new patches
Look, I'm yeah.
to
We
go
know
with the
our bit.
Dandyland.
Yeah, I know. We need. That's interesting. Well, think about it. Think about some slogans. Like, I'm all for the collective. I am not here to tell you I got all the answers. I got some stuff to share.
So I know you've covered this a little bit in the past, but I'll go ahead and ask it. What do you think about those who are trying to opt out of the system, live off grid? How realistic do you think that, giving all the efforts to keep us under their thumb? So I don't know
Live
if you
a
want to address that
beautiful
again.
life. If living a beautiful life off the grid is what, like, do that thing, but don't do it from a sense that you're escaping. Because this system, as I'm trying to articulate it, is about frequency weapons that are coming through a poison environment at the atmospheric level. You can't get away from this thing. And that is in that way, it is a unifying message. Be in community, learn new, old practices, be on land, be respectful, make art, do all of that. If that brings you joy, do that, because that's what pisses them off. But don't do it because you run away, because I think, and build with others who don't have a way out. Because that, from my space of coming into this from impact investing, there are too many people who would be abandoned, and if, what is that, and I'm like I said, I'm still trying to struggle with this with my elderly parents. It's like, how do we protect vulnerable people in this? And I don't feel like I'm being very successful at it, but try to come from a place of reciprocity, I think.
So I'm not really sure that, I think I understand this question, but how many years ahead of time is your content? Would you say 10 years? Will this be known in 3, 5, 10, 20 years? Like,
I don't know, if they have the nanotech, maybe it'll all be erased out of our consciousness. Like, as soon as we think it, they'll be like, they'll get sucked right back out.
What was the Men in Black movie? Remember that?
Yeah,
movie?
they got the thing.
They had the thing that made people.
It's a blue light, isn't it? Isn't that the LEDs? I'm going to talk about
yeah.
Yeah, it's probably photonics. Yeah, predictive programming.
Mary Lynn, I think, I'm not sure if this is a question or not, but it says she made new comments about creating digital twin and using it to get us to compete with our digital twin. So
yeah,
I didn't see the original comment,
right?
Yeah, the idea that
human, you suck. Your digital twin is so much more efficient than you are. That'd be terrible. Can you imagine having an inferiority complex to your digital avatar? That's bad.
So I think we're caught up on the questions.
Okay,
hopefully I didn't, if I missed your question, I apologize, just re-ask it. I'm trying to keep up with it, but I think I got them all.
Oh, thank you, Jason. You're doing a great job. Okay, so this is just, we're going to get into graphene, and I have to say, that for those of you who have been following me, I would get kind of frustrated with the, like, we don't know who's in charge or who's behind this, who's Mr. Global, and I would say, oh, it's the Impact Management Project. I can, look at these 2,000 of the world's largest asset holders, because I was looking at it with my social impact investing lens, and everybody has their own lens and they have their own assessment. But I think if you zoom back and you're like, well, who are the impact investors maybe working for? If you understand this as, what if Mr. Global were Mr. Graphene, right? And Steffers actually has an interesting piece on a piece of Mindful about Mr. Graphene moving forward. So what if at the end it's about graphene? I think, and again, Celeste Solom was the one who last fall first introduced me to the idea of graphene, hydrogel, and I wasn't in a place at that point to really absorb the significance of what she was saying. I knew it was important, but I didn't really understand the nanotechnology or the biosensors. I believe what is happening, and I think I touched on that yesterday, is not necessarily mass depopulation, but would be reproductive control, chronic illness, and pushing more people into towards soft robotics and humanizing the robots and roboticizing the people. Because what they most want from us is our data, is sort of our core essence of our beingness. And so mass depopulation, if the goal is, as I imagine it, is to break this code of life, they're not going to waste any being that they think that they have some good data to harvest out of towards that end. And so if they can, but they do want to incapacitate those and reduce any resistance to the program. And so I think that what is going on is that, you know, there is a fair level of toxicity involved in graphene oxide, and the dosing and administration is something that they're very interested in. And La Quinta Columna, they were, you know, anyway, so they found that in the medical, actually, this isn't theirs. I got a little bit confused. This isn't their slide. This is talking about tissue implants with graphene. And let's see, graphene hydrogel. And it's interesting because that they're focused on brain diseases. And I'll just read this because it's so small. What makes this method special is that the mechanical properties of the hydrogels, which are graphene hydrogels, are largely retained. This way they could be particularly well suited, for example, as a material for medical functional implants, which are used to treat certain brain diseases. And so here it says the caption, the hydrogel is streaked with microchannels of ultralight electrically conductive graphene. Okay, so in this case, they're talking about treatment of brain illness, getting hydrogels with graphene into the brain. This is a section, I'm just gonna read this. It's from a different paper, but it's talking about soft robotics and hydrogel. So again, and I think Celeste speaks to this, most robots are built using rigid materials, and these robots are designed to efficiently carry out pre-planned tasks, so on and so forth. So those are like the massive, like assembly line robots. But conventional rigid body robots struggle to operate in unstructured environments because they're composed of discrete links and joints. So they don't really function well in a human-centered environment. The desire for compliance and safe robots has led to the development of soft-bodied robots, and that's Hanson Robotics, Sophia the robot, that sort of model. Since the continuously deformable bodies of soft-bodied robots give them a high degree of freedom, they can handle irregular tasks in a less complicated manner. And so they are using, thus there have been rapid progress in the development of compliant materials to meet the growing needs of soft robots. So that hydrogel is what they're using to build the soft robots. And that's something that actually Amazing Polly had touched on in a very compelling way in her presentation. And that'll be in the slide deck. I linked to this talk where she was talking about the use of hydrogel in soft robotics. And then that as we use more and more hydrogel in our bodies, we become part of this continuum of human-computer interface. So this is actually the image from La Quinta Columna. And let's see, I think, looking at the images and matching up the graphene on their electron microscopy. And I do have, I think, a link to their original analysis and report. It's in Spanish, but a lot has been translated by Orwell City. And this is just sort of a small joke, but I don't have lots of popular movie literacy, but I do remember the Time Bandits movie where the little boy goes off on this journey through time. And again, we're thinking about time manipulation. And at the end, there's a house fire, and the fire department comes, and it turns out the mother has left a roast unattended in the toaster oven. And so they're outside, and they realize the source of the fire is the roast in the toaster oven. And the little boy from across the yard says, "Mom, Dad, don't touch it. It's evil. Don't touch it. It's evil." And of course, the parents then touch it, and then they blow up. And so I sort of feel like, in some ways, and is graphene, is this black rock, the black cube, the AI, the gray goo, is this an illusion in Time Bandits to graphene being the evil thing that is below this two-dimensional material that seeks to overtake and usurp our place in the universe? Again, I'm going to go a little bit faster, but this is talking about functionalized graphene oxide serves as a novel vaccine nanoadjuvant for robust stimulation of cellular immunity. Okay, so this is an issue from the journal Nanoscale in 2016. So if you just put in adjuvant and graphene oxide, there's quite a few papers coming up. So the findings of La Quinta columna is not a big surprise. This is from a different paper where they talk about that, that the graphene can induce severe cytotoxicity and lung disease. And so as we understand the presentation of these illnesses, and that is what La Quinta columna has said, those scientists, is that the presentation of poisoning by graphene oxide is very similar to the symptoms that people have experienced after being part of these medical protocols. And I think what is happening is that knowing that there's a toxicity and knowing that there's a way of adjusting the levels is what they're trying to accomplish is to create not mass die-offs, but actually mass colonizations of our bodies by these minerals that will allow them to manage our biological processes, monitor it for the data, and then manage how we function in smart environments and to tweak that. So again, okay, I'm looking, they want to put graphene in everything. I mentioned yesterday about, the graduate and Benjamin, the future is plastics. It's in one word, it's plastics that, now they're saying the future is graphene. Everything is in graphene. This is a professor at Munich, but they're talking about using it in many materials: electronics, optics, photonics, composite materials, energy generation. So that's batteries, sensors, and bio devices. And, they're looking at putting it in the food cycle, right? And so Tetra Pak is part of using graphene in food. And once we understand systems and supply chain management and control of supply chains and data, like this all makes sense, is that they're going to manage us, they're going to manage our food, they're going to manage the package the food is in, because in the end, data is the new oil. It's always about aggregating more data, but the end is not simply just around financial opportunities, making money, making the hedge funds making money on these bets, but actually to trigger the singularity by immersing our whole world in this two-dimensional material that has very specific electrical properties. So I will say in this space, Rice University in Texas is really, really important. And I think, let's see, this gentleman's name, he's a chemist, James Tour, which is something that Steffers has brought to my attention. And this got a lot of shares on my Twitter feed at Philly852, PHILLY852. This was a number of days ago, but they were actually talking about using laser technology to turn anything that was carbon into a surface that could then be turned into graphene and be electrically conductive and do computation on it and do tracking. So they were talking about using lasers and then graphene to put tracking systems on containers, boxes, food, potatoes. I think a lot of these were sort of sacred, like potatoes, coconuts, anything, but and that they could turn anything that was carbon into graphene. And if you imagine what that is, it sort of imagines that like the whole universe they're looking to turn into graphene ultimately, including people. And that will be framed as a sustainable option, right? Like we can turn all of our garbage into graphene. We can just zap it with lasers. And then I think we do have to understand all of the laser technology and the photonics within, again, a military construct. Directed energy weapons at scale, right? Like you have various sizes of directed energy weapons that can, are coming out of Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, and this is a militaristic prize. So the other piece is, let's see, Rice is also, so these are just other things that Rice is involved in that aren't specifically graphene, but they've got, so the quantum dots holding recordings, so tagging people with information and then being able to access that electronically is also at Rice. And then there was a video about, this was in a Rice laboratory where they used a Tesla coil to have nanotubes. And again, they're talking about creating nanotubes with graphene. Nanotubes self-assemble under the presence of a Tesla coil. And so if you understand yesterday when we were talking about the cyborg botany and this idea of wiring plants and turning plants into displays for computing and making them interactive and self-aware and that was being done with wires. It wasn't that someone was shoving a wire up the stem of a shrub, that it was that the living systems and the tissues of those plant materials would be imbued with carbon nanoelectronics that could then, through the imposition of electromagnetic pulsing, self-assemble into the coded machines, nano machines that are internal to it. So these things are all happening at Rice, and James Tour gave some testimony to a recent congressional hearing about smart energy, and a lot of this is going to be framed within the context of the climate crisis. And like, you know, I do have really grave concerns that humans are and other living beings are going to be part of the smart renewable energy field. Rice has been working with DARPA on Neurotech. They have 6 paths to non-surgical future of brain-machine interfaces. That was a project that was done, this N3 team, and it says they're working on optics, acoustics, electromagnetics to record neural activity and send signals back to the brain at high speed and resolution. That there are teams that are working on non-invasive programs and minutely invasive. So this is well beyond Neuralink and Elon Musk. Like, clearly he's out there for show, but they have much more sophisticated technologies, and the interests that are involved include Battelle, Carnegie Mellon, Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, Teledyne, the Palo Alto Research Center, and Rice are all involved in that. So if you're imagining that you're going to be safe from having the human-machine interface because you're not going out to get a Neuralink implant, I think, you know, don't think that you're just out of the woods yet. And that goes back to the conversation that we had about, can you get out of this thing? How do we totally get out of this thing? Is that once they start imbuing this into the environments, there's really going to be nowhere in the world to escape it. And that's why, on principle, we have to stand against it from the outset, and to interrogate it from the outset, and to make people aware of it from the outset. And again, that's not China doing that. That's DARPA. That's our own military. Like, that is, again, understanding this is empire. So these are just a couple of other papers that I would put. This one is from 2018. They're talking about using photonics, so light, for next generation telecom infrastructure. So a lot of this is about optics and photonics. That graphene has certain photonic properties that give it advantages in the electrical engineering space, in transceiving and creating these nano antenna, really. And that they were talking about using fuzzy graphene for neuron control. So I think at this point, we really need to imagine that the latest world war that is underway is a war on our neurons, like actually a war on our consciousness, and it is happening with weapons that we cannot even discern with our current level of immediate sensing organs. Although we could probably sense it intuitively in our spirit that this war is happening with invisible weapons. And so using the graphene for neuron control, that is the game I think that we're in right now. And getting the graphene in a way that what their aim is to dose us in graphene so that it doesn't kill us. It can maim us, but not fully kill us. Graphene batteries are a big thing. Graphene in and of itself is not magnetic or piezoelectric, but there are ways in which you can layer it and build it and twist it and dope it with other things that make it suitable for green, quote unquote, green batteries. A leader on that is Norway. So they have a whole section here on graphene batteries. And Innovation Norway is central to this. Again, Gro Harlem Brundtland has always been in on the climate change stuff since the very beginning, since the Rio Summit, and is also involved in CP and IFFI, and simulations and digital public goods alliances. So Norway is really central. You know, you got to keep an eye out. As much as I really want to make sure people's needs are met, the Nordic socialist model is a real setup for cybernetic systems engineering and engineered behaviors. This is a paper from Stanford, their materials computation and theory group, where they're talking about engineering piezoelectricity and graphene. So we have to understand that it's not simply about signaling, but also about power modules, because the metaverse if it's digital, it's going to have to be fueled in some way. Okay, I'm going to keep going here, and then we'll stop for some. These are just some crazy things that they can do with this technology. So remember, I said that, you know, we are the mice. To us, we're just talking mice. That they have now developed using graphene electrodes, wireless systems with implantations in mouse brains to steer them, right? So they've got these wireless dimensions. Here's this mouse, and they're developing it. But clearly, you know, this is from 2018. I'm sure they've got their technology much more reduced from this space. The use of LED lights to activate cellular function with these biosensors is super important. And when I went up to Utica, a key element of this, they were part of a $1 billion public-private partnership in Marcy, which is outside of Rome. It's a nano center. They have a 450-acre semiconductor manufacturing facility. This is the largest facility manufacturing these in the world. And they are manufacturing silicon carbide, which are the foundational elements of LEDs. So I think most people, when they think of LEDs, they think of LED lights. Clearly in the smart cities, we've got a lot of installations of these street lights. And I think we kind of need to understand those also in some ways as directed energy weapons, but that LEDs are also used in clinical settings to activate the brain implant, like the brain implantation, the biosensors to trigger certain behaviors. And Cree is the product that they develop. The company is actually based in Durham, which ironically is where you know, Epic Games is. So that's sort of a center of the metaverse, and NC State and the I'm trying to remember the labor force, the place where they assign all the codes for the labor force is also in Raleigh, Durham, and Duke is in the middle of all of this impact investing. So there's a lot going on in the Research Triangle area. That the company that was developing these LED lighting sensors, again, they're in the Research Triangle area, but this lab, and you know, I usually, whenever I go give a talk, when I am fortunate enough to go to an actual place, I want to know how does this lay on the land. Well, here there is this very significant nano center that's tied to SUNY Polytechnic. Let me just remember. So this is from a paper. They're talking about. This is just more neural control, and I'll just pull out a few things. They're working in neuroscience. They're working on photonics in neuroscience and optogenetics, the use of coded proteins that are activated with light, and that they are working on developing selective control of neural activity and causal manipulation of specific circuits. Okay, so that's like, we're going to make you our puppet from a distance. That they can map the neural circuits. Again, that is the library system. That graphene electrodes hold a great promise for neural monitoring applications. Okay, graphene specifically, owing to the unique combination of properties, including transparency, flexibility, high conductivity, biocompatibility, if they can get it right, and single molecule level sensitivity. Okay. Transparent microelectrode arrays made of graphene have been used for multimodal probing of neural circuits using 2-photon microscopy and optogenetics. The optical transparency of graphene has been shown to enable efficient delivery of light for imaging of neuronal populations with high spatial resolution. Okay, while recording their neural activity by the graphene electrode with high temporal resolution. Okay, so guys, I mean, they are about using graphene to record neural activity. And so when you look back at that crazy blog about the fairy and the dandelion, and you're talking about wrapping thought, weighing thoughts, putting weight on thoughts and wrapping thoughts in graphene, these people know exactly what they're doing. And again, it's all dual use. I'm sure all of this will be framed as that we're just here to help someone with a neurological problem, you know, neurological problems. But if you don't understand this as empire, if you don't understand this as mining the being part of humans as data, not just for these behavioral economics, pay for success finance deals, but actually to become God, like that is really sick. It's sick. And I don't even know how we put the limits on this stuff. again, this is working on LED lights, the Office of Naval Research, connected with National Nanotechnology. They're talking about using blue LED lights. So Jason, we were just talking about Men in Black and zapping people, literally zapping their memories, erasing their memories with the blue light, right? So we've got the blue LEDs. I have had people say that they were followed, who were targeted and were flashed with LED blue lights out of a car behind them that made their motor function, their mental function, made them cognitively impaired and put them in danger. And that Cree, which is the LED lights that are being fabricated outside of Rome, is one of these LED optogenetics products. So that was relevant for them up in Utica. So this is from Northwestern. This is in May, so this is brand new. Science News, implanted wireless device triggers mice to form instant bonds. Okay, so again, these are these optogenetics, neural programming, where they actually had groups of mice, and through frequencies, they could make selective mice have a bond with one another, a social bond, and seek each other out. And then through removal or changing of the frequency, they could then remove that bond. And so I think as we, again, understand what is happening in this world, why people don't get it, why it's impossible for some people to understand what's happening, why we've lost friends, why we've become distanced from family members, we need to understand it within the context of what is going on with these frequencies, and how much of this is already embedded in our environments beyond whatever has happened with medical interventions the past year. So this is LED and smart cities. Oh, actually, this is just a little bit more about the socialized mice. So they can use external light to control and monitor brain activity. And they've genetically engineered the mice to do that. But they haven't yet done it in people, supposedly. So evidently it hasn't yet happened to people, but that they can do this in mice. In enclosed environments, they could activate a set of neurons related to higher order executive function. And I will say both Gates and Zuckerberg are very, very interested in executive function in education, to get that data off of the children, and to have them be more socialized. And then they could separate them. And they said they didn't actually think it would work, but this is the first evaluation they've done, so that they can actually literally manipulate brains through light frequency. They can also, this is the MIT News, this is from 2013, okay, so this is a while ago. They can plant false memories in the brain, and they can do that with light sensitive proteins, which is this optogenetics, tagging neurons in the brain and operating them remotely with signaling, with gatekeeping on how the neurons operate to have certain, to plant memories. And so this way they actually shot mice in a certain chamber, and it was labeled. They taught them to fear a certain chamber and connected it to the light proteins, and then they put them in a different chamber that didn't have the harmful, but they could use the light to activate the fear mechanism, so they could implant a false memory. In this one, this is a paper from Oxford from, let me see, this is 2015, so 5 years ago, neuromodulation of group prejudice and religious belief. So Jason, this kind of goes back to what when you were talking with Julianne and in the other interview you just had about, religion, or being able to be religious, have faith, managing faith, managing hygiene around what you're allowed to think and what you're not allowed to think around certain faith practices. In this, I will just read a little bit out loud. This report, which was out of Oxford, was a proof of concept that adherence to high-level abstract belief can be experimentally neuromodulated. Okay, and we need to understand all of this within Tavistock MK Ultra, right? But the present design doesn't address key questions that merit further research, most notably to create a context where ideological adherence could be expected to be intense, particularly with regard to religious idea. We reminded participants about death. And so they were essentially modulating people's feelings about death and people about religion and in group and out of group remotely through neuromodulation, which is pretty crazy because a lot of the conditioning, the operant conditioning that we see going on is happening through trauma. And a lot of the trauma is about through violence and references to death and dying, which is what we've seen this past year, is that we're under this trauma-based mind control system. So I think increasingly, as I keep asserting that I feel like this is a sacred engagement, an engagement of spirit, an engagement that involves all people of faith around the world to ground into your specific faith practice, how you connect with the creator, the greater being, God. You know, if this goal is that they're seeking to usurp God, is to be resonant in that place, the idea that they are seeking to neurally modulate one's abstract held beliefs, in particular religious beliefs, and this is coming out of Oxford, is a real problem. And I think this is the last one on this section, that the human brain cloud interface. And again, I've spoken yesterday about Melanie Swan, about her idea that we will have blockchain brains, that we will engage in problem solving with machine consciousness. This paper was from 2019. And in that they talk about neural nanorobotics. And again, that is these getting graphene, assembling into nanotubes for nanomachines, which are, you know, crazy stuff that was talked about in Neil Stephenson's The Diamond Age book back in 1995, that through remote frequency or photonics, that those would be self-assembling within your living biological tissues, and that those would change how your neurons act, and then therefore change your emotional state and behavior. So neural nanorobotics are expected to empower many non-medical paradigm shifting applications, including significant human cognitive enhancement. Okay, so on the one hand, we have to think of power dynamics. Is like, there may be people who think this is a wonderful thing, but there are people who feel like they're going to be empowered by this technology and not diminished by it. So if we're talking super soldiers, superhumans, I think that is the gist of where they're trying to go. And that is not, if they are effective in that, certainly that is, their goal is not egalitarian, is not to give these interventions to all the people so that everyone can have high level cognitive advancement. It's going to still retain the caste system. By providing a platform for direct access to supercomputing storage and processing capabilities and interfacing with artificial intelligence. So this is the quantum computing and AI, which is very central. Also in upstate New York, IBM is very focused on quantum computing and AI. And there have been significant investments since the early 1990s under Cuomo to make upstate New York, and particularly the greater Albany area, a center for a lot of this. Since information-based technologies are consistently improving their price-performance ratios and functional design at an exponential rate, it is likely that once they enter clinical practice or other non-medical applications, neural nanorobotic technologies may work in parallel with powerful artificial intelligence systems, supercomputing, and advanced molecular manufacturing. So there's that. And probably a lot of that is going to be, in my opinion, has to keep track of on blockchain. Like as they increasingly engineer you towards robotics and through, you know, nanorobotics, you're going to have to keep track of all the nanotech that they put into you, and that will come through your digital twin. And this is just a couple of images that I had from the timeline about tech in upstate New York. Governor Cuomo in 1993 had $10 million in nanomaterials and nanoelectronics. So that's 1993. Cuomo is investing in nanoelectronics in Albany. Applied materials, another 850 million through New York Creates. That's a bit later. Leveraging 600 million from private investment for prototyping and pilot projects like virtual intelligence, augmented and virtual reality, semiconductors, and advanced optics. And this is a while ago. This is not 1993, but this is a bit ago. New York leaders working with DARPA, $5 million in state funds to match 45 million in DARPA for a Center for Advanced Interconnect Science and Technology. And that is working with the University of Albany, RPI, Georgia Tech, which is the Center of Internet of Bio-Nano Things, Stanford, and MIT. So again, lots of New York presence in that. Outside of Rome, there is an Air Force Research Lab. A lot of the frequency work, the radar work is central to the Air Force. As my friend Richard has said, they rule from the air, and at this point, it's not really planes or satellites even, it's also the frequencies. They have a whole lab that they're using to test like 300 different pads to test different, let's see, command, control, communication, computers, intelligence, and cyber technology. This is a special directorate that is working on this. And once you understand that cyber technology is not really just like something in your laptop or something in a mainframe or something on your phone, that cybersecurity is actually neural nanorobotics in your mind, the level of military involvement in that is chilling in the way I think about it. Also up that way, so this is the site Stockbridge that they're doing research on frequencies. It says that they are truly unique and have the capability to support real world outdoor and tactical edge experimentation for a wide range of technology with remote nodes or pads spread across 300 acres. Sorry, it's only 25 pads. 25 remote pads with shelter, power, antenna, towers, fiber optics, and network connectivity. So they're doing cyber controllable contested environments. And again, is that contested environment our own biological tissues at some point? It seems that is where it's going. And this is connected to this Greyfus Institute, which is in the same area. It's an accelerator for all of these technologies, and they've been working with the Air Force since 2002, because all of this is public-private partnerships, and it's all, I mean, that's fascism essentially. I mean, and a lot of this stuff is our tax money going into this to weaponize the environment and pursue a transhumanist ideology. So I'm just going to skip forward and then stop. A lot of this is tied to globalization. There's the economic piece, which is the piece I normally touch on, keeping humans in the loop. The humans to robots, robots to humans. I've touched on the hydrogel and the soft robot element of this. The push for soft robotics is the push for automation and removing people from care work, social care work, teaching, medical. Some of it is going to be platform work, but then some of it is coming through Hanson Robotics, and I think they have their own new healthcare robot that's coming online, which is really, really super creepy, and that's coming. So the hydrogel is a big piece. But within those robots, they still have to learn. So this is the woman I was talking about who is connected to D-Wave, Suzanne Gildert. This video I really encourage you to watch. You can find it on YouTube. Someone shared it with me. It's from 2018. And she's presenting this at Singularity University, but their event in the Nordic Summit. So this is Scandinavia that she's gone to, and she's talking about essentially a haptic suit, which I talked about often, a virtual reality headset, and putting her consciousness in the mind of the robot. And so training this robot, that this idea that you will train the robot through your haptic suit directly. And this woman has actually developed her own digital twin, soft robotic twin. This is Sanctuary AI. And she's developing this cognitive architecture. Again, it goes all the way back to the Macy conferences and understanding how the mind works. They want to understand our mind so that they can feed it into an anti-life substance that is under their control. And before that, she worked at D-Wave, which is quantum computing, because to make all of this work, the metaverse, the soft robots, the neural nanorobotics, all of it is functioning on frequency and very high level computing systems. Those soft robots, eventually they talk about keeping humans in the loop. So we're actually like using the robot like a puppet. That is part of the globalization agenda. Again, what blockchain is going to do is to establish your digital identity and your right, as Charles Hoskinson said, to have a job, to be able to compete for a job based on your blockchain reputation score, to operate a robot at a distance. And there's a film that was done a number of years ago. Oh gosh, I'm trying to think. Sleep Dealers. It's a Spanish film, independent film, about people who are trapped at the border, who are operating these remote robotic programs, like building construction sites, and they're trapped in a small underground area, and they plug in through a sensor device, and then they run the robots remotely. And this is part, I've talked about this in some of my other talks, but it's part of the globalization. We also can never forget that on top of all of the AI and the domination narrative there is a concurrent capitalist debt finance, globalization narrative going on as well. That's going to happen through your augmented identity, your digital twin. And I've showed this image before about the Ready Player Me, that it is your passport to the metaverse. And this is your digital twin who will be your avatar to do online work that is not through a robot. It is turning you into a cartoon character. And actually what's interesting about this particular program is that depending on what gamified space you're operating in, they use your selfie and then they remake your avatar to fit from a design standpoint in the design genre of that particular gamified environment. And I'm not a gamer, so I don't know all the different ones, but like if you're in Minecraft, it will make you look relevant to Minecraft. If you're in another program, they'll make you look like you're relevant to that. And that's all based on a selfie avatar. They took like 20,000 images of people, and now they can just add your selfie to it, and they will give you this avatar that makes you lovable, I guess, online in the metaverse as you try to do your gig robotic work. This is from the website. They're talking about that the youth today will be born in a virtual world, and you can do anything. They're selling this as liberation. You can communicate with anyone. It's really big. And today, social media is passive, but if you become an avatar, you can. It's a weird kind of interaction. You feel like you're friends, and you can communicate with people through these avatars. So they're saying this is a much more dynamic way of being. That program was actually invested in by Estonia and the European Union. So that makes a lot of sense because Estonia is the Center for e-Government and Digital Identity, and that's going to be woven into all the social credit scoring. That's where Tim Draper said, we don't need borders anymore. We don't need countries. We'll all just be digital citizens. And I guess we will live as digital avatars. Again, touching on that, the e-residency and actually the company, I'm sure some of you guys might be able to read some significance into this, but it's called Wolf 3D is the company that owns Ready Player Me. And so again, Tim Draper said, it leads me to ask if there's still a need for physical countries with borders at all. I mean, we already have Bitcoin as independent virtual currency and different services that don't comply with traditional government regulations. They are pushing us into the metaverse in 2 dimensions, and graphene is a key part of how that is happening. Again, I would say, I think that I would concur with my friend that perhaps that Mr. Global is actually Mr. Graphene. The Impact Management Project is working for this hive mind consciousness that might be the burnt up roast in the toaster oven. And, it's very interesting too, because even within the Freemasonic symbolism, that there's a big G in the middle, which I guess you might interpret as God, but perhaps it was always meant to be graphene. Again, I'm just jumping through a couple more things. This is one of, let's see, is this Melanie Swan's? Smart contract behavior in crypto cloud mines. I mean, come on, people. Like, if you don't wake up and smell the coffee, this is Melanie Swan's work. I don't know what's gonna, they're talking about using blockchain to put your mind in the cloud to control it. And in this, they actually talk about smart contracts, blockchain contracts for surviving in the future. Good player behavior could be game theoretically enforced with privacy properties of blockchain and an immutable ledger. So they're putting you in the game, and they can enforce the rules, and they can force you to be a good player. And I think if we understand the domination principles of the Sustainable Development Goals that are set up for the hedge funds, we know what that means to have them use blockchain to control your good behavior and make sure you're compliant. And again, this is IEEE, blockchain thinking, the brain as a decentralized autonomous corporation. They want to corporatize everything. Everything is about money and control. And if they can turn your brain as a company, they are going to do that, and they are going to conduct a hostile takeover through graphene and nanotech. So this paper is from 2015. So yeah, I guess that's about it. I've talked a ton about pay for success finance. You guys are probably pretty familiar. They're going to game the system. They're going to set narrow measures. It's run by the CIA. That's the Augmented Cities. That's the Knight Foundation. If the Knight Foundation is operating in your city, please understand that it's not just to have some nice, interesting, interactive artwork. It has a much darker underlying thing. It's about putting people on the pathways and tracking them. It's about your e-wallet as the portal to the metaverse. It's about controlling you through the digital currency. which, you know, they're going to set it up and they're going to make you think that you can have your own independent blockchain currency, but eventually you're not going to be able to use any of it. They're going to control the inputs and outputs. And if you have a local currency, it doesn't need to be on blockchain anyway, so why bother? And they're going to nudge you with your smart shirts and the smart sensors from the inside and the outside, and they're going to feed your brains to Sophia the robot, and they're going to, here's, you know, connecting finance to results. Can emerging technology make impact bonds more impactful? You know, again, we know how that's going to go. Those are the diabetes impact bonds, among others, that are going to get your data to feed it to the Singularity Net through Ocean Protocol. And that's what is so really intensely upsetting about what's happening in Ethiopia with Cardano and Hanson Robotics. So yeah, definitely check out my podcast with Sakia on Ethiopia. It's really important. And yeah, and I think I will close out. I keep thinking I'm done, but Logan's Run, a big center of this is Dallas. As I've said before, some friends and I, we went to Old Parkland and we saw some really interesting things. There's a corporate campus there that actually later became the campus of Exxon, but one of the key buildings that was filmed in this movie, which is set up that, you know, you're only allowed to live to be 30, and then you're killed off, and it's this hedonistic, every sensual pleasure imaginable, but there's no family, there's sort of no morals, everything is sort of this hallucinogenic scenario. And at one point someone tries to escape. Well, one of the buildings in this film is actually a center, what's now called Pegasus Park. It's a center for the biotech hubs and impact investing. It's a very clear connection here. And if you understand, all of this is threat scoring and risk profiling to see if you're going to be the runaway in the Logan's Run movie of nanotech dystopia. Like, we can imagine all the levels of control that they're exerting, from your cells to your emotions to your physical activity, your house, your social relationships, travel, work, compliance with health protocol, productivity, and your ultimate threat score. That this is all happening through the frequency waves. And if you understand this within the context of Logan's Run, they want to know who's going to run, and they want to demobilize you remotely before that happens. So this is Pegasus Park. I will also say this particular building that was in the film and that was part of the Exxon campus was originally home to Zales, which is the diamond company, sort of the mall diamond company. And I think they played a key role in man-made diamonds later, fabricated diamonds. And once you understand that a lot of the nanotech and graphene is tied in with this diamondoid substance, which is another carbon-based, but it's diamondoid. There's something called the nano fabrication factory. And I have some articles that I found on this, that they're looking at how to build things molecule by molecule, and they're building them with diamondoids. So I think the fact that this was the Zales building to start with is significant. Then Exxon, and then I think graphene actually is somewhat related to petrochemical waste products. So big energy, big oil is at the middle of all of this. And this is also this social impact innovation hub. So it is this quite a wedding of biotech and social innovation. Draper Kaplan's Richard, again, remember we were talking about Tim Draper in Estonia. Well, this is his father, is their foundation is based in Pegasus Park. Robert Kaplan is the president of the Dallas Federal Reserve, and we know all the human capital finance is coming out of the central banks. So they are having special offices in Pegasus Park, among other social impact organizations. So this whole program is being driven with central banking money. And if you look back to Kaplan and Draper in this, you've got the central banking systems, and then, William Draper, who I believe this is the father of Tim Draper. He was the head of the United Nations Development Program. We know all of this is going through the aid systems, the Import-Export Bank. He was the chairman for a while. It goes all the way back to the Council on Foreign Relations, among others. So it's very logical that the central banking systems and the nanotechnology and the biosensors and the behavioral compliance would all link back through the UN Sustainable Development Goals, development aid, tracking capital. Okay, so I am going to stop here because I would love to do MITRE, but I know we've run short on time. And maybe, Jason, if you will humor me, and we can do, MITRE is only about 50 slides. Maybe we can do one more talk at some future point, because that is the center of cybernetics. In talking about MITRE Corporation that was birthed out of MIT, that was integral to the Cold War and to systems engineering and radar frequency setups. It really led me to totally revisit my understanding of what the Cold War was actually about, and that in some ways it was maybe perhaps largely obscuring this plan that's unfolding now 50 years later to advance this transhumanist program through nanoelectronics. So.
Okay, well, yeah, so if you're still on there, if you still have any questions, I think we're probably nearing the end here, but I would point one thing out. A lot of people don't know what SMART is. When they say smart cities, they get so, oh, it's like intelligent city. It's actually an acronym, and it means self-monitoring, analysis, and reporting technology. Thought I would throw that out there.
No, that's good. Yeah, imagine you're going to have a smart brain, right? Self-reporting and analysis.
Right.
Great. Yeah. Report back. Make sure you report back to Hal, the thought police.
Do you think that at the moment, one of the first and most used control tools is the silly phone, smartphone, and just getting rid of our phones? Would that do what would that do for us, at least in giving us some time? Or do you think that would play a big role in stopping some of this? I mean, it seems like it's a lot more than just a smartphone, but do you want to say something about that?
I mean, I mean, to me, if people are asserting that and they're not interrogating the nanotech, I find it to be a distraction. Because I have quite a number of people just say, just throw out your phone, it'll all be over. Like if we all just throw out our phones, it would all be over. And that is a certain line of thinking. But given that I've spent like 6 or 7 hours over the last 2 days describing because I do believe that these substances, besides being administered through medical, devices, medical injections, what have you, it's in the environment. And that's what I know. Alana has a book coming out on transhumanism, Alana Freeland, who has done immense work and way more than I am just sort of lightly digging into, but that it is weaponizing our full-on environment. And so if there's someone who's only saying the answer is to throw out your phone, but they're not actually talking about this other huge part, which is the internet of bio-nano things, to me, that is misleading to people, because then people, I mean, sure, the phones are part of the problem, but ultimately the plan is the biosensor technology. And actually, just as everything gets smaller, you have ENIAC, which is a computer that's, rooms full of processing. And then, then eventually you have personal computers on desktops, and you have laptops, and then you have phones. I mean, the levels that they're using now that could actively be influencing what's happening are not discernible with our senses. And I think that's where, when I get to the point, when what Stephen Newcomb has said in Pagans in the Promised Land about not being able to have the mindset of the invader, we have to actually, I'm not saying live in that space or live in that space of fear, but if we can't position ourselves to understand where the invader is, that the invader is intent on doing a colonization through carbon nanotubes of all the tissues, not just of human beings, but of the entire world, to hijack the existing electrical system towards a mechanical process to break it down so that it can get run the train, then that's not helpful, in my opinion. So, I mean, to me, that kind of smacks of like, if you're not perfect, or I'm saying that if you're not perfect, we can't have the conversation, which I don't find particularly helpful. Like even with the blockchain people, I would say, if you want to have the conversation, like you're not going to change my mind on it, but like have the conversation and interrogate it in all of the perspectives of it. But if we're using it as a shutdown just to say, well, if you can't perfectly be off the internet and live in the woods, then we shouldn't even bother. I find that not helpful.
Someone asked, do you research any of the potential dangers of LED lights with PWM, which is pulse width modulation, fast on-off flicker? Depending on how it's implemented, it can cause electrosmog too.
See, I would love help on this. I don't know, for people who maybe weren't here yesterday, I'm wading into an area that is not my wheelhouse per se, because I felt when I gave this talk, and again, for those who are just tuning in, like I gave it in Utica last weekend, and I thought I was actually giving a talk about MITRE Corporation and cybernetics and how that related to things. And MITRE just got pushed all the way down to the bottom, and clearly what was unfolding with graphene and nanotech felt like it needed to surface. But I will defer, there are many more people who are far more knowledgeable. And even once you scratch the surface of what is happening with the nanotech and frequency and light, there are tens of thousands of papers. And I don't in any way want to assert that I have a full handle on what this is. I would love for more people to be examining this, because I think this is the thing that needs examination, is how do nanoelectronics and digital twinning and neural control fit in with this metaverse and unlocking light. And so, yeah, so I don't have specifics on those particular lights, but my experience was, as soon as I started researching smart cities, it was all about the smart street posts. I mean, besides the trash cans, we got the stupid smart belly, big belly trash cans, but everything was about the street lamps. And I will say, we're a very poor city, and one of the poorest sections of the city is along the L in Kensington and Frankfurt. And this is a part of the city that can get no investment of any material resources, and yet they have brand new LED lights under the L every 50 feet. And how does that happen? So that tells me that there's something in the photonics optogenetic space that is going to be interacting with engineered nanoparticles that we need to be paying attention to. But this is just the beginning. This is just barely the beginning. And I don't mean to represent myself as the expert. I'm just sort of like throwing my puzzle pieces out on the table now, and asking people, let's start sorting it out.
So someone asked, what would we say at this point about what are the three to four most important things people need to know about this horrendous situation? And I would just say, like, it's really hard to summarize it. You kind of just need to spend the time, watch these talks and the previous ones. I don't see how you can really in three or four things.
I mean, it sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? Like, if you didn't see the papers, I mean, Jason, I know you haven't had a chance to look at this stuff a lot before, but once you actually start looking at the papers and straight up what they're saying, of course, all the things that they're saying under the guise of we're here to help people with medical conditions. And that's the narrative that is being told. And I think, I mean, for me, okay, so number one is understand that we are living in an empire. Because none of this makes sense if you don't understand that there's a tremendous power imbalance, and that those are in charge are willing to cause grave harm and have harmed lots of people for a long time. So some of it is letting go of the myth of what we imagine, like those of us in the United States imagine it to be. And to me, that's where I situate it within the idea of indigenous genocide, is that this erasure has expanded the net to include all of natural life on the planet. And then it is our responsibility as beings and sibling beings on this planet to stand up for what is right. So first you have to get in your heart space, I think, to understand that we're living in an empire and it's not our fault. You're born where you're born, but then how you choose to work in that is important. So that's the unlearn number one. I think the other unlearned thing would be really look into terrain theory, right? Understand the role of environmental toxin in chronic illness and the mainstream medical. I mean, most of the people watching this probably are already pretty aware of that, but even within the resistance community, there is a split. There is a split between people who are concerned about, the existence of some small invisible thing that can kill you, and then those who are looking at the environmental. And I would say at this point, I lean more in the second camp, and that's why it was important for me to present with Tom and Andy, because that is their situation, and they're still outliers at this point. So I think that's the other thing that you need to grapple with. I think the other piece is we have to understand the social conditioning and the conditioned behaviors and how those relate to sensor technology and surveillance. That there are going to be bets placed on our required behavior aligned with these goals. And that, I guess the last thing is that they want to use the data to become gods, which sounds crazy, but I think in that way, if we situate this engagement from a place of spirit, that the universe doesn't want that. The universe is on our side. So those would be my four things, I guess. It's so empire, terrain theory, hedge fund betting on behaviors controlled by sensor technology, and data collection towards the singularity and replacing God. I think those are my four. And that's a lot of homework because you have to be willing to actually let stuff go, and it's hard. And I can't tell you to do it, and I can't tell you 100% that I'm right. I can't promise that I'm right, but I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I'm fortunate to be connected to a lot of super smart, caring people who come from a diverse range of backgrounds, but have a lot of life experience who are teaching me things. And so my understanding for the present time is that that is what it is. Not to say it couldn't evolve. We all continue to learn and evolve. We should, or we're just a chunk of graphite in the toaster oven.
All right, so we're halfway through the program. We're going to go through. We're going to end this at midnight tonight.
Jason, you're a trooper. Thank you.
There was one other question about technology and progress in general. We actually talked about that earlier in the program. I think maybe you came in on late, so I'm going to kind of skip over that one. But yeah, thank you guys for joining us. Allison, is there anything else? I think that's all the questions.
Cool.
Is there anything else you want to
I would
finish
just
out
say,
on?
like, yeah, maybe we should talk and I'll give you a little bit of a break, but I'd still like to go over MITRE because that's an important piece, and it's a smallish piece, but it's an important chunk because it ties into the Cold War and our understanding. Again, that's some of the unlearning, I think. But yeah, thanks for sticking with us. I hope that this is helpful. I would encourage you again to look into a piece of mindful steppers on that blog. Piece is in a puzzle piece. And, hopefully Alana, I know she's incorporating a lot of new information in her book on transhumanism, and that will come out soon. And, please, if you're in this contesting the narrative space, add this to your repertoire of things you're learning about and talking about, because that's at this point, I feel really strongly that that's the thing that we need to unpack more. And if you know people who are in computing, who know about Nano, let's get their minds together, because yeah, we don't want to end up in the gray goo.
Before you go real quick, do you want to just really quickly just say what MITRE is so people know? And we'll do another program just on MITRE, but just so people know what, when they see that MITRE, they kind of get a little teaser of what that's going to be.
Yeah. About. So MITRE it's a nonprofit. So I guess it's your early public-private partnerships, right? So it's sort of a skunk works, I guess. And it spun out of MIT. And what was really compelling is that the person who actually, it was founded by someone from the Ford Foundation, so that's central to the whole impact investing space, as well as someone from RAND, I believe. And one of those individuals went on to create the first venture capital fund on the West Coast that essentially birthed Silicon Valley. And this report, I think it was the Gaither report, during Sputnik, they issued a report saying we are nowhere prepared for what's coming with the threat. And so we need all of these, air defense missile, the strategic air command, and we need all of the radar frequencies. We need to get everything up to speed. And so that's what they were focusing on. And the cybernetics came into all of that and the frequencies, but then later evolved to managing air traffic control, managing simulations for the military, managing cybersecurity, and then increasingly moving on to data-driven government and overhauling Medicaid and Medicare, and also Department of Homeland Security work. And so you can sort of start to see how the frequency engineering systems, simulation systems, I think in many respects, when you look at like the Tomahawk missiles, these steered missiles, is that they're intending to use the sensor technologies to steer us as almost like not exactly weapon systems, but to gain control of our faculties and to steer us, to use us to their end, which is in this case, to get the data analytics to accomplish the thing that they're trying to accomplish. So the connection between the radar systems and the overhaul of Medicaid and Medicare and health IT and blockchain and simulation and pay for success finance is really significant. And so I want to sort of show that through line, that the cybernetics, that the engineered human mind and consciousness and biological body, and framing people as security threats and things to be managed and profiled is long-standing and has been since at least the late 50s and back to Eisenhower at the very least. I mean, it couldn't really go back to the Roman Empire, but at least in our current mindset, the cybernetic piece is really important with Licklider and Wiener and Macy and Miter. Checks all the boxes.
So some people want us to do more, but I think
I'd like to do that one as its own chunk because I think I need to like really refresh myself because I had done this a couple weeks ago about all of the particulars, and actually I might have one or more two things to add.
All right,
we'll leave you hanging on the edge of your seats. It's like the old-timey movies, right? Like the animal in distress on the train tracks or something.
Join us next time. Same bat channel, same bat time. So great. Thank you guys. Thank you, Allison. And we'll do this again. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Jason.
I think, maybe in the next week or something, I think we could probably schedule it pretty quickly so you don't have to wait too long. All right.
I don't want to dominate your time. I try to be non-dominating. It doesn't always work.
You're so controlling, but I'm a sycophant. So what can I say? No. Joke. All right. Well, thanks you guys for joining us, and we will do this again in the very near future. So thanks. End the stream. Okay, Allison, I have stopped streaming. Are you there?